Hey there, tonight we're diving into the surprising reality of why surviving a day in an ancient Aztec temple isn't about dodging Hollywood-style traps, but rather enduring the relentless nasal assault of sacred incense and the daunting climb of thousands of steep stone steps. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You're jolted awake by the rhythmic pounding of drums echoing through your makeshift bedroom in the heart of Tenochtitlan. It's not your alarm clock with that annoying ringtone, but the sound of a city waking up. And what a city it is! The early morning sun glints off the Temple Maya, the grand centerpiece of this Aztec capital, casting long shadows across the sprawling metropolis. If you thought rush hour in your hometown was hectic, try navigating a city of over 200,000 people with no cars, no bikes, and definitely no sense of personal space. Welcome to Tenochtitlan, the Vegas of the 15th century, but with more feathers and fewer Elvis impersonators. Built on an island in Lake Texcoco, this city is a marvel of urban planning. Imagine Venice, but swap out the gondolas for canoes and add a few thousand more people per square mile. You'll be rubbing elbows, or elbows and feathers, with a population density that puts modern-day Manhattan to shame. That's right, at its peak, Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world, a bustling hub of commerce, politics, and yes, human sacrifices. Now, before you start romanticizing your new Aztec life, let's talk logistics. The city's layout is a grid system, which sounds familiar until you realize it's designed with canals instead of roads. Yes, you're essentially living in a Mesoamerican water park, but without the fun slides or chlorine smell. And while it might seem charming to hop into a canoe to get to work, just wait until you encounter a traffic jam of paddlers all trying to avoid the floating market stalls. Suddenly, your morning commute doesn't seem so bad, does it? As you navigate the city, you're quickly introduced to the Aztec social hierarchy, a complex web that makes Game of Thrones look like a kindergarten sandbox. At the top, you have the Tlatoni, the ruler who lives in a palace that rivals anything you'd find in Beverly Hills. Below him are the Pippleton, the nobility, who enjoy privileges like land ownership and fancy feathered capes. Then come the Mace-Hualtin, the commoners, who do the heavy lifting, quite literally. And finally, the slaves, who, spoiler alert, do not enjoy the same freedoms as even the lowliest intern in your office. Speaking of the workplace, let's talk about the Aztec economy. Forget about 9-to-5 jobs. Here, work is a communal affair. The bustling markets are the beating heart of the city, with everything from cacao beans to textiles traded like your modern-day stock market. And cacao beans aren't just for your morning mocha. They're actual currency here. Imagine paying your rent with chocolate. Sweet life, right? Except you need quite a few beans because inflation is no joke, even back then. As you stroll through the marketplace, dodging merchants and their enthusiastic pitches, you might catch the scent of maize tortillas cooking on an open flame. But don't get too comfortable. These markets are also the prime venue for Aztec politics. The Huey Tlatoni himself might make an appearance, and trust me, you don't want to be caught gawking. The political scene is cutthroat. Alliances are as stable as your Wi-Fi during a storm. It's an environment where one wrong move could mean the difference between power and a one-way ticket to the sacrificial altar. By now, you're probably craving some of that famous Aztec chocolate. But prepare your taste buds. It's not the sweet milk chocolate you know. This version is bitter, spicy, and often mixed with chili. Think more fiery energy shot than comforting hot cocoa. It's no wonder Montezuma was rumored to drink gallons of it a day. With all the political and social juggling, who wouldn't need a caffeine boost? As the sun climbs higher, the city's vibrant energy pulses through you. You're part of a world that's both fascinating and overwhelming, where beauty and brutality coexist in every corner. The Aztecs might not have invented the concept of work hard, play hard, but they certainly perfected it. By lunchtime, you've seen enough to know that surviving in this society takes more than just blending in. It takes wit, courage, and a stomach strong enough to handle both fermented agave drinks and the site of the occasional ritual sacrifice. So, as you stand before the Grand Temple Maya, with its twin temples dedicated to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, consider this. Life in Tenochtitlan is a constant balancing act. It's a world rich in culture and tradition, where every stone and feather has meaning. But it's also a place where the stakes are high, and the demands are relentless. You've survived the morning, but the day is far from over. Ready for what comes next? Well, let's just say you'll need more than just chocolate to get through it. So, with the Temple Maya looming above you like a stone colossus, let's take a deep breath and step into the heart of Aztec spirituality. Spoiler alert, it's not all crystal healing and peaceful meditation. First off, let's address the elephant, or should I say the jaguar, in the room, human sacrifice. Yep, the Aztecs were all about it, and not just on special occasions. But before you start clutching your pearls, let's slice through the sensationalism and get to the meat of it, pun intended. The practice wasn't just some bloodthirsty ritual born out of barbarism. It was deeply woven into the fabric of Aztec religion and society. You see, to the Aztecs, the universe was a delicate balance of forces, and human blood was the oil that kept the cosmic gears turning. They believed the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, needed a little boost to fight off darkness every day. And what better energy drink than the essence of life itself? While it might sound macabre, this belief system was as intrinsic to the Aztecs as Wi-Fi is to us. But there's more to the story than a spiritual transaction. Human sacrifice was also a tool of political power, conquering a neighboring tribe. Time to invite their finest warriors to the ultimate sacrifice, which doubled as a not-so-subtle display of dominance. It was a message to the masses. Challenge us, and you're next on the altar. Quite the power play, huh? Imagine your boss using quarterly reports as a threat. Not quite the same, but you get the idea. And let's not forget the economic angle. Those sacrifices didn't just honor the gods, they also kept the priestly class in business. Priests wielded significant influence, acting as intermediaries between mortals and deities. But their power wasn't just spiritual, it was political and economic too. They controlled vast stretches of land, basically the Aztec version of corporate real estate moguls. And as any good mogul knows, you need to keep the stakeholders, the guards in this case, happy to maintain your position. Speaking of priests, let's dispel another myth. They weren't just draped in robes, wafting incense around with a serene look on their faces. No, sir. These folks were the original multitaskers. They managed temple lands, orchestrated elaborate rituals, and had a hand in local politics. If they had LinkedIn back then, their profiles would read like a Dickensian novel. They were essentially the Aztec version of a Swiss Army knife, ceremonial, administrative, and slightly terrifying. Now, as you stand at the base of the temple, let's take a moment to appreciate the logistics of this architectural masterpiece. Constructing the Temple Maya was no weekend DIY project. We're talking about a structure that rivals the pyramids, with twin temples dedicated to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli perched on top. It's believed the Aztecs rebuilt the temple 6 times, each layer adding more grandeur and complexity. Imagine coordinating a construction project like that without modern machinery. No cranes, no bulldozers, just good old-fashioned manpower. Thousands of workers moving massive stones by hand. It's enough to make your last home renovation seem like a walk in the park. And the resources. The stones came from quarries miles away, lugged across the lake on canoes, and then hauled to the site. Talk about a logistical nightmare. It's like moving house, but if your house was made of solid rock and weighed thousands of tons. The temple itself was a nexus of religious and social activity. It's where the community gathered for festivals, ceremonies, and yes, the occasional sacrifice. But it wasn't all gloom and doom. These events were also vibrant celebrations with music, dance, and feasting. Think of it as a mix between a church service, a political rally, and a rock concert. The Aztecs knew how to throw a party, even if the guest of honor might not have survived to appreciate it. And let's not overlook the temple's role as a symbol of Aztec power and ingenuity. It was a towering reminder that Tenochtitlan was a city to be reckoned with. The temple was as much a political statement as it was a spiritual one, proclaiming to allies and enemies alike the might of the Aztec civilization. So, as you stand there, taking in the grandeur of the Temple Maya, remember this. The Aztecs weren't just bloodthirsty pagans, as some might have you believe. They were a sophisticated society with complex religious beliefs, political acumen, and architectural genius. Sure, they had their brutal moments, but let's not pretend modern history is free of its own dark chapters. As the sun begins its descent, casting golden hues over the temple's stone facade, you're left with a sense of awe. The Aztecs were masters of their world, balancing the demands of the gods with the harsh realities of earthly politics. Surviving in their society required more than just strength. It demanded cunning, faith, and a willingness to take risks. And while you might not last a day in their sandals, you can't help but admire their tenacity. But don't pack up your canoe just yet. There's still more to uncover in this vibrant and enigmatic city. From the bustling markets to the sacred rituals, life in Tenochtitlan is a constant dance between tradition and innovation, beauty and brutality. So, are you ready to dive deeper into the heart of the Aztec Empire? Hold onto your feathered headdress, because things are about to get even more fascinating. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting a dazzling glow over the temple mare, your stomach reminds you that it's lunchtime. But before you start daydreaming about a turkey club sandwich, let's dive into the Aztec culinary scene, a world where maize, beans, and chili peppers were the trinity of staples, and chocolate was the ultimate power drink. Spoiler alert, you won't find guacamole on the menu, and I'll tell you why. First up, maize. Forget your corn on the carb and popcorn fantasies. Maize was the lifeline of the Aztec diet, the bay and say of their food pyramid. This versatile crop wasn't just food, it was culture, it was economy, it was life. The Aztecs had a saying, "The people are made of maize," and with good reason. Maize was ground into masa to make tortillas, tamales, and all those delicious goodies you probably scarf down at your local taco truck. But here's the kicker. Maize wasn't just picked and eaten. It underwent a process called nixtamalization, where the kernels were soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, usually lime water. This process made the maize more nutritious by increasing its calcium content and making it easier to grind. Think of it as the original food hack, long before Instagram influencers were touting their latest superfoods. Next, let's chat about beans and chili peppers, the unsung heroes of the Aztec diet. While your taste buds are accustomed to the mild, slightly sweet flavor of black beans, the Aztecs had a smorgasbord of varieties to choose from. These beans were a crucial protein source, providing much-needed energy for a society that didn't exactly have the luxury of a peloton for daily exercise. And chili peppers, they added a fiery kick to nearly every dish. Forget bland. The Aztecs were spicing things up long before sriracha hit the scene. Now, while you're mentally assembling your Aztec-inspired lunch plate, let's not forget about chocolate. But hold on. Before you start dreaming of Hershey bars and hot cocoa, brace yourself. Aztec chocolate was a far cry from the sugary confection you're used to. It was a bitter, frothy beverage made from cacao beans, often spiced with chili and flavored with vanilla or honey. Montezuma himself was said to consume copious amounts of this concoction, and given the political stress, who could blame him? Call it an ancient energy drink, minus the neon colors and questionable side effects. Speaking of cacao beans, they were so valuable that they doubled as currency. Yes, you heard that right. Imagine strolling into your local coffee shop and tossing a handful of cacao beans on the counter for a latte. It's a testament to their worth that they were used in everything from everyday transactions to paying taxes. And while it might sound like a chocoholic's dream, it's essential to remember that this was a society where bartering was the name of the game. Forget about dollars and cents. In Tenochtitlan, it was all about beans and bartering prowess. Now, let's take a stroll through the bustling marketplace, a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells that would make any modern-day farmer's market look like child's play. Picture this. Vendors hawking everything from textiles to tools, spices to sacrificial knives, all while you dodge the occasional canoe traffic jam. The market was the beating heart of the Aztec economy, a place where social classes mingled, and fortunes were made, or lost, on the barter system. In this vibrant hub, cacao beans were the currency of choice, but they weren't the only things traded. Goods from across the empire and beyond found their way here, thanks to the extensive trade networks the Aztecs maintained. Turquoise from the north, tropical bird feathers from the south, and even commodities like vanilla and cotton were all in the mix. It's like eBay and Amazon had a bustling, feather-clad baby. But let's not romanticize it too much. Bartering wasn't always a straightforward affair. Imagine negotiating the price of a cloak with someone who's more skilled at haggling than your average used car salesman. And while today's markets might offer you a kale smoothie or some organic avocado toast, the Aztecs had no such luxury. Avocados were around, sure, but used more in sauces and dips than on toast. Sorry, millennials. As you wander the marketplace, the midday heat intensifying, you start to appreciate the ingenuity and resilience of the Aztecs. Despite the lack of modern convenience, they created a thriving economy and a complex society that managed to sustain itself on the basics. It's a reminder that while we might be inundated with gadgets and gizmos today, sometimes it's the simple things that keep a society ticking. So, as you take in the hustle and bustle, the laughter of children, the calls of merchants, and the aroma of cooking maize, one thing is clear. The Aztecs knew how to live with gusto. Life here was a vibrant tapestry of tradition and innovation, where every transaction, every meal, and every ritual was a thread in the larger fabric of their civilization. With the sun high in the sky and the marketplace alive with energy, you're immersed in a world that feels both foreign and familiar. The Aztecs were masters of their universe, deftly balancing the demands of daily life with the spiritual and political complexities that shaped their world. And while you might not survive a day in their sandals, you can't help but admire their tenacity, creativity, and spirit. But don't get too comfortable. There's still more to explore in this enigmatic empire. From the intricate social hierarchies to the awe-inspiring architecture, the story of Tenochtitlan is far from over. So, ready to dive deeper into the enigma of the Aztecs? Stay tuned, because the journey is just getting started. As you weave through the thrumming marketplace, the sun high above and the air thick with the scent of chili and cocoa, let's switch gears and dive headfirst into the Aztec legal system. Spoiler alert, it's not exactly a place you'd want to find yourself if you have a penchant for jaywalking or a mild caffeine addiction. Aztec justice was swift, decisive, and about as subtle as a sledgehammer. No room for lawyerly theatrics or dramatic courtroom speeches here. Imagine this. You're accused of stealing from a market stall. In our modern world, you'd lawyer up, maybe plead the fifth, and hope for a sympathetic jury. In Tenochtitlan, however, you'd find yourself swiftly hauled before a local magistrate, the Tekutli. Think Judge Judy, but with more feathers and considerably less patience. The Aztecs had a penchant for directness, and justice was served with the efficiency of a fast food drive-through. Got caught with your hand in the metaphorical cookie jar? Expect a swift trial and an equally speedy sentence. Penalties were harsh, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty was about as foreign as a Wi-Fi signal in the 15th century. Theft could earn you the loss of an ear or a life of slavery, while more severe crimes might result in a one-way trip to the sacrificial altar. Let's just say the stakes were high, and the system wasn't designed for second chances. But here's the kicker. Despite its harshness, the Aztec legal system had its own brand of equity. For starters, it was accessible. Commoners could bring their grievances to court, and the system operated on the principle that everyone should know the laws. In a society without written records, laws were memorized and recited by judges, ensuring that ignorance was never an excuse. It's a bit like living in a town where the only book is a rule book, and everyone's memorized it cover to cover. Now, let's talk about the bigwigs, the Tlatoni, the emperor himself. The Aztec ruler was the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one. While you might think this sounds like a recipe for tyranny, the Tlatoni was bound by tradition and the council of nobles. The Huey Tlatoni, or Great Speaker, wasn't just a figurehead. He wielded real power, with the ability to make or break both laws and lives. But even he couldn't act with impunity. His actions were closely watched by the nobility, ensuring a precarious balance of power. Social mobility in this society was about as flexible as a steel rod. If you were born a commoner, chances were you'd die a commoner, and social climbing was more of a pipe dream than a reality. The society was stratified into classes, from the ruling nobles, the Pippleton, down to the commoners, the Macehualtin, and finally the slaves. Each class had its roles, rights, and responsibilities, and crossing those lines was rarer than a day without ritual sacrifice. But wait, there's a twist. Despite the rigidity of the system, the Aztecs had a mechanism for merit-based advancement, at least for the warriors. Prove yourself in battle, capture enemies for sacrifice, and you might just climb the social ladder a rung or two. Successful warriors could earn land, titles, and even a shot at joining the nobility. It's like a corporate ladder, but with more loincloths and less PowerPoint. The key to understanding Aztec society lies in their emphasis on communal responsibility. While the modern world celebrates the individual, the Aztecs were all about the collective. Your actions weren't just your own. They reflected on your family, your community, and your guards. This communal mindset was the glue that held their society together, ensuring that everyone played their part in the grand cosmic balance. Now, as we explore the nitty-gritty of Aztec norms, one thing becomes crystal clear. This was a society that thrived on order. From the meticulous urban planning of Tenochtitlan to the precise rituals of the priests, everything had its place. And while the rigid hierarchy might seem stifling to us freedom-loving moderns, for the Aztecs, it was a source of stability and strength. So, as you walk the sun-drenched streets of Tenochtitlan, navigating a world of strict social codes and unyielding legal systems, you start to appreciate the complexity of it all. It's a society where every action has meaning, every role has purpose, and every person, from the Tlatoni to the lowliest slave, is part of a grand, interconnected web. But don't get too comfortable. The day isn't over yet, and there's still more to uncover in this vibrant and enigmatic city. From the bustling markets to the awe-inspiring temples, life in Tenochtitlan is a constant dance between tradition and innovation, where the stakes are high and the rewards even higher. So, ready to dive deeper into the heart of the Aztec Empire? Keep your eyes open and your wits about you, because the journey is just getting started. As the sun begins its descent over Tenochtitlan, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and crimson, you might feel a sense of awe at the vibrant tapestry of Aztec life. But before you romanticize your Aztec urban experience, let's take a step back and zoom in on the cultural marvels that made this civilization tick. Spoiler alert, it's not all chocolate and feathered headdresses. First up, let's talk about the Aztec art scene. If you think modern art is perplexing, try deciphering the codices, those intricate pictorial manuscripts that served as the Aztecs' historical and religious record. These weren't just doodles. They were sophisticated visual narratives, capturing everything from epic battles to divine pantheons. The detail was so intense, it made Monet look like a finger painter. Yet there's a catch. The Spaniards, in their zeal, destroyed many of these codices, leaving us with just a handful. Talk about cultural vandalism at its finest. Imagine someone deciding to improve your Instagram feed by setting it on fire. Moving on to architecture, the Aztecs were the original overachievers. Their pyramids and temples were not just grand structures. They were celestial calendars carved in stone. The Temple Maya, for instance, was aligned with the sun and the stars, a cosmic timepiece that put even the most elaborate Swiss watch to shame. It's believed that during the equinox, the sun would rise directly between the twin temples of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, a divine spectacle choreographed to perfection. Next time you struggle with daylight savings time, remember that the Aztecs were syncing their rituals to the cosmos without a single smartphone app. Speaking of calendars, the Aztecs didn't just have one. They had two, running concurrently like cosmic train schedules. The Xiuhpohualli was your standard 365-day calendar, while the Tonalpohualli was a 260-day sacred calendar, used for rituals and divinations. Together, they created a 52-year cycle, the Aztec equivalent of a cosmic reset button. This was a people who took timekeeping seriously, probably because their lives depended on appeasing the gods at just the right moments. It's a bit like trying to balance a checkbook in a currency that fluctuates with the whims of the deities. As we ponder their celestial savvy, it's worth asking, why were the Aztecs so obsessed with the heavens? The answer lies in their worldview, a blend of astronomy and theology that saw the universe as a delicate balance of cosmic forces. The sun wasn't just a celestial ball of gas. It was a god battling nightly against the forces of darkness. Every sunrise was a victory, every sunset a reminder of the eternal struggle. It's like living in a perpetual Marvel movie where every day is a cosmic showdown. But don't start packing your bags for a permanent stay just yet. Living in an Aztec temple sounds exotic, but the reality is less urban and more survival camp. For starters, those temples were built for gods, not human comfort. Picture stone, cold floors, no insulation, and altars that doubled as sacrificial stages. Not exactly a list of amenities you'd find in a glossy travel brochure. You'd have a better chance of getting a good night's sleep on a bed of nails, literally. And let's not gloss over the darker side of temple life. The Aztecs' penchant for human sacrifice might make today's reality TV look positively wholesome. The ritual bloodletting was a community affair, attended by priests, nobles, and commoners alike. It was part religious rite, part political theater, and entirely unsettling. Imagine trying to enjoy your morning coffee with the fresh memory of last night's festivities lingering in the air. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these harsh realities, the Aztecs left a legacy that still captivates us. They were masters of their world, balancing the sacred and the profane with a dexterity that would make Cirque du Soleil performers jealous. Their achievements in art, astronomy, and architecture weren't just feats of human ingenuity. They were acts of faith, expressions of a worldview that saw every stone, every stroke, every star as part of a grand cosmic design. So, as the day in Tenochtitlan winds down and the city settles into its nocturnal rhythm, you're left with a sense of wonder at the complexity of this civilization. The Aztecs were a people who lived with their eyes on the heavens and their feet firmly planted on earth, navigating a world as beautiful as it was brutal. They remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry of human experience, woven with threads of triumph and tragedy. And while you might not last a day in their sandals, the Aztec story is a compelling chapter in the shared saga of humanity. Their legacy challenges us to look beyond the myths and confront the realities, to appreciate the beauty without turning a blind eye to the darkness. So, as you close this chapter of your historical journey, take a moment to reflect on the lessons the Aztecs offer, a testament to the enduring power of culture, and a reminder that even amidst the most daunting challenges, the human spirit endures, creating, believing, and dreaming. At the heart of Cleopatra's story lies a whirling cauldron of ambition, intrigue, and quite a bit of familial backstabbing, literally and figuratively. You might think your family dinners are tense, but the Ptolemaic dynasty redefined dysfunctional. Cleopatra, born in 69 BCE, was part of a royal family that made the Lannisters from Game of Thrones look like the Brady Bunch. Her early years were steeped in the kind of drama that would make reality TV producers salivate. The Ptolemaic dynasty, established by one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy Isoda, had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries by the time Cleopatra came along. While they might have been in charge, their grip was often slippery, thanks to an endless carousel of family feuds. This wasn't just a dynasty, it was a full-blown soap opera. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy Roman XII, affectionately nicknamed Orleats, or the flute player, likely not because he was musically inclined, but because he was more interested in blowing his own horn than ruling, had a rocky reign. He was booted out of Egypt in 58 BCE and only managed to claw his way back 3 years later, thanks to a hefty bribe to Rome. Just imagine the family reunion after that little escapade. Cleopatra grew up in this volatile environment. Learning early on that trust was a rare commodity. She had several siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, who were more like rivals than family. The Ptolemaic tradition of sibling marriage aimed to keep the royal bloodline pure, but what it really did was make family gatherings a hazardous affair. Cleopatra was betrothed to her younger brother Ptolemy Roman XIII, a union designed more for political convenience than romantic bliss. You can almost picture the awkward wedding photos. As if navigating sibling rivalry wasn't enough, Cleopatra also had to contend with the economic challenges of ruling Egypt. The country was a shadow of its former glory, burdened by debt and dependent on grain exports. Rome, the rising superpower, was both a trading partner and a looming threat. Cleopatra was acutely aware that keeping Rome at bay while maintaining Egypt's autonomy was a delicate balancing act. She was a savvy operator, fluent in several languages, including Egyptian, making her a rarity among the Greek-speaking Ptolemies and a hit with the local populace. Her education was first-rate, involving the study of philosophy, oratory, and mathematics. This blend of linguistic flair and intellectual prowess made her a formidable player on the political chessboard. Cleopatra's early maneuvers in this cutthroat world were marked by astute political acumen. When her father died in 51 BCE, she co-ruled with her brother-husband Ptolemy Roman XIII. But the partnership was less harmonious duet, more competitive duet. Eventually, their differences led to a full-blown civil war. Cleopatra, displaying her characteristic boldness, fled to Syria to drum up support. In the meantime, Ptolemy Roman XIII was busy making terrible decisions, like denying entry to a certain Roman general named Pompey. Ptolemy thought executing Pompey would curry favor with Julius Caesar, but instead it ticked him off. Bad move, Ptolemy. Enter Julius Caesar, who arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE, probably more interested in straightening out the mess than admiring the pyramids. Cleopatra saw her chance and seized it with both hands. Legend has it she smuggled herself into Caesar's quarters rolled up in a carpet, or maybe it was a sack of linens. Either way, she made one hell of a first impression. Here's where myth and reality do a little tango. Sure, the carpet story is dramatic, but Cleopatra's appeal went beyond theatrics. She was intelligent, charming, and politically astute, qualities that impressed Caesar, who was no stranger to cunning tactics himself. Their alliance was mutually beneficial. Caesar needed grain for Rome, and Cleopatra needed a powerful ally to reclaim her throne. The two became entwined in both politics and romance, and soon enough, Cleopatra was back in power, co-ruling with her younger brother Ptolemy Roman XIV. Because, why break the habit of marrying your siblings? The early phase of Cleopatra's life was a masterclass in survival and strategy. She maneuvered through treacherous familial waters and volatile Roman politics with a blend of charm and cunning that would make a modern-day politician green with envy. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face in a golden headdress. She was a shrewd leader navigating a perilous world, one political chess move at a time. As we delve deeper into her story, we'll see just how far she was willing to go to secure her legacy and her throne. Cleopatra may have been the last pharaoh of Egypt, but she certainly knew how to make her first impression count. Cleopatra may have been the last pharaoh of Egypt, but she certainly knew how to make her first impression count. And what an impression it was. Imagine Julius Caesar, Rome's top dog, in the bustling chaos of Alexandria. It's 48 BCE, and he's knee-deep in Egyptian politics, fresh off the chaos of Pompey's murder, and probably wondering if he should have just stayed home. Enter Cleopatra, the ultimate wildcard, wrapped up in a carpet like she's a surprise birthday present. It's the kind of entrance that would have today's influencers green with envy, and it was as audacious as it was effective. Let's roll back that carpet, literally, and examine why this moment was so pivotal. Cleopatra wasn't just staging an elaborate prank. She was orchestrating a high-stakes maneuver to reclaim her throne. Picture the scene. Alexandria, a city buzzing with tension, Roman soldiers milling about, and Cleopatra, just 21 years old, already a veteran in the Game of Thrones. Her brother Ptolemy Roman XIII was in charge, but Cleopatra was determined to change the narrative. She wasn't just a pretty face, she was a political powerhouse with a plan. Now, the carpet story is the stuff of legends, but it's also a testament to Cleopatra's flair for the dramatic. Whether she was actually rolled up like a burrito or smuggled in less theatrically, the fact remains. She got Caesar's attention. And once she had it, she wasn't going to let go. Caesar, who was no stranger to political intrigue and strategic alliances, found Cleopatra's boldness and intelligence enticing. After all, he was in Egypt to sort out the mess left by Pompey's assassination, not add to the body count. Let's talk strategy. Cleopatra needed Caesar's support to regain her throne, and Caesar needed Egypt's grain to feed Rome. It was a match made in political heaven. Cleopatra's move was as risky as betting your life savings on a single roll of the dice, but it paid off. In Caesar, she found not just an ally but a partner who could bolster her claim to power. For Cleopatra, this was about survival, and she played her cards brilliantly. The political chess game that followed was nothing short of fascinating. Cleopatra and Caesar's alliance wasn't just about romance, though that certainly added spice to the story. It was about power and survival in a world where both were fleeting. Cleopatra knew that aligning with Rome was crucial. Egypt might have been the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, but Rome was the one holding the knife. By securing Caesar's support, Cleopatra managed to outmaneuver her brother, who, let's be honest, was in way over his head. Ptolemy Roman XIII, perhaps sensing the sands shifting beneath his feet, decided to resist. But this wasn't some sibling squabble over who gets the last piece of cake. This was a full-blown civil war. And in war, as in politics, Cleopatra proved she was a force to be reckoned with. Caesar, backed by his legions, faced off against Ptolemy's forces in a series of battles that tested both his military prowess and Cleopatra's political acumen. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Cleopatra, this wasn't just about reclaiming a throne. It was about securing her legacy and Egypt's future. She was playing a long game, one that required her to think several moves ahead. And while Caesar was no novice to the game of power, Cleopatra was a master of her own board. Together, they managed to turn the tide against Ptolemy Roman 13, culminating in the Battle of the Nile in 47 BCE, where Ptolemy met his end. Rumor has it he drowned in the river, but the truth, like much of history, is murky. With Ptolemy Roman 13 out of the picture, Cleopatra's path to power was clear. She was reinstalled as queen, this time with her younger brother Ptolemy Roman 14 as co-ruler, a mere formality, really. Cleopatra was the real power behind the throne, and she wasn't about to let anyone forget it. Her alliance with Caesar had not only secured her position, but also strengthened Egypt's ties with Rome. Yet, this was no ordinary diplomatic partnership. It was a complex web of personal and political interests that would have far-reaching consequences. Cleopatra's strategic brilliance lay in her ability to navigate the dangerous waters of Roman politics while maintaining her grip on Egypt. She understood the importance of balancing Rome's demands with Egypt's sovereignty, a tightrope walk that required both finesse and foresight. Cleopatra wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, proving that she was more than capable of holding her own in a world dominated by powerful men. Yet, as with all great stories, there are layers to peel back. Was Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar born out of genuine affection or cold calculation? Perhaps it was a bit of both. History has a way of romanticizing such figures, turning them into larger-than-life characters while glossing over the harsh realities they faced. Cleopatra was a woman ahead of her time, navigating a patriarchal world with skill and tenacity. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Cleopatra's life, we'll see how she managed to maintain her grip on power amid the shifting sands of Egyptian and Roman politics. Her story is one of survival, strategy, and sheer will, a testament to her enduring legacy as one of history's most formidable leaders. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen, she was a force of nature. And her journey was far from over. Cleopatra's journey was far from over, and just as she was getting comfortable in her Egyptian throne once more, the Roman political landscape was shifting like desert sands in a storm. Enter Mark Antony, stage left, a Roman general with enough charisma to power a small city and political ambitions as vast as the empire he served. Now, if Cleopatra and Julius Caesar had been a power couple, Cleopatra and Antony were the ultimate political alliance. They were the OG power couple, long before Beyoncé and Jay-Z were even a twinkle in anyone's eye. Antony first met Cleopatra in 41 BCE in Tarsus, a city in modern-day Turkey, and it was one of those meetings that could have rewritten the plot of every romantic comedy. Cleopatra, ever the master of spectacle, arrived on a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars, essentially the ancient equivalent of pulling up in a limo with a full entourage. If you're going to make an impression, you might as well make it gold-plated. Antony, no stranger to grandeur himself, was suitably impressed. But this was no simple love story. It was a meeting of two political titans who understood the stakes involved. Cleopatra's relationship with Antony was, at its core, a strategic partnership. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his military campaigns, while Cleopatra needed Roman support to maintain her grip on power. It's like they were both playing the world's most high-stakes game of Monopoly, and Egypt was boardwalk with a hotel. Their union led to a series of military campaigns that would have made a top-tier Netflix series. Together, they embarked on a mission to expand their influence and secure their positions, a political two-step that kept Rome and Egypt dancing to their tune. Antony's military ventures in the east were ambitious. He sought to conquer Armenia and even had his eyes on the Parthian Empire to the east, a formidable rival to Rome. Cleopatra, of course, was not just a passive observer. She was an active participant, funding Antony's campaigns with Egypt's vast resources, grain, gold, and a fleet of ships. This was no small investment. It was like funding a blockbuster movie, hoping for a box office hit. Cleopatra was betting on Antony to secure her position and ensure Egypt's continued prosperity. However, this partnership didn't come without its fair share of drama. The Roman Senate wasn't exactly thrilled with Antony's cozy arrangement with Cleopatra. Back in Rome, Octavian, Antony's rival and future Emperor Augustus, was painting Cleopatra as a femme fatale who had beguiled Antony, dragging him away from his Roman duties. This was less about love and more about power, influence, and control. Cleopatra was depicted as a seductress, a narrative that's persisted through the ages, but let's not be too quick to buy into the tabloid version of history. Cleopatra was a shrewd political operator who saw Antony as a means to an end, a way to secure her and Egypt's future. Economically, Cleopatra's alliance with Antony was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it solidified Egypt's position as a vital ally to one of Rome's power players, boosting trade and ensuring that Egypt's grain was in constant demand. Rome's population needed feeding, after all. On the other hand, it tied Egypt's fortunes directly to Antony's success, which was a risky proposition. Antony's military ambitions were costly, and Cleopatra's coffers weren't bottomless. It's a bit like investing in a tech startup. There's potential for huge returns, but the risk of going bust is just as real. Socially, Cleopatra's image took a hit, especially in Rome. The propaganda machine cranked up, painting her as a foreign queen meddling in Roman affairs. She was the Kardashian of her day, constantly in the public eye, often misunderstood and subject to relentless scrutiny. The portrayal was less about who she was and more about how she threatened the existing order. A powerful woman in a man's world was always going to ruffle a few feathers, and Cleopatra ruffled them with aplomb. Yet amidst the political machinations and military campaigns, Cleopatra and Antony did have a personal connection. They had 3 children together: Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene Roman II, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. This wasn't just about cementing their political alliance. It was about creating a dynasty that could potentially rule both Rome and Egypt. Imagine the family reunions. Enough political intrigue to make even the most seasoned diplomat break into a sweat. But as with all great stories, the cracks began to show. Antony's military campaigns didn't always go as planned, and the political climate in Rome was turning against him. Octavian was gaining power, and Antony's alliance with Cleopatra was seen as a liability. The tide was turning, and Cleopatra's strategic gamble was under threat. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE would prove to be a turning point, an epic naval showdown that pitted Antony and Cleopatra's forces against Octavian's might. This was no ordinary skirmish. It was a battle that would decide the fate of empires and the course of history. The stakes were astronomical. Antony and Cleopatra's naval forces were vast, but Octavian's fleet, commanded by the capable Agrippa, was relentless. The battle was fierce, and as the tides of war shifted, Cleopatra's fleet was forced to retreat. Antony, ever the romantic, or perhaps just pragmatic, chose to follow her, abandoning the fight. It was a move that sealed their fate. The defeat at Actium wasn't just a military loss. It was a devastating blow to their political ambitions and a harbinger of the storm to come. The economic implications were equally severe. The defeat meant the loss of valuable resources and territories, and Egypt's position as a major power player was now in jeopardy. Cleopatra's once strong grip on her kingdom was slipping, and Rome's shadow loomed ever larger. The narrative was no longer one of triumph and expansion, but of survival and desperation. As the dust settled, Cleopatra and Antony retreated to Alexandria, their dreams of a combined empire in tatters. It was a moment of reckoning, a realization that their grand plans had come crashing down. Their story, so full of potential and ambition, was unraveling at the seams. But Cleopatra wasn't one to go quietly into the night. Even in the face of impending doom, she was plotting her next move, ever the strategist, ever the queen. As we leave Cleopatra and Antony on the brink of their final act, it's clear that their story is both a testament to ambition and a cautionary tale of hubris. Their partnership, born out of mutual need and political calculation, was a whirlwind of power, love, and tragedy. Cleopatra's legacy, though marred by Roman propaganda, remains a testament to her intelligence, her daring, and her indomitable spirit. But the story isn't over yet. There's more intrigue, more drama, and more lessons to be learned as we continue to unravel the saga of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll see how Cleopatra faces her final days with the same courage and cunning that defined her reign. Now, as the sun began to set on Cleopatra's ambitions, we find her and Antony back in Alexandria, licking their wounds from the Battle of Actium. This wasn't some small spat with a neighbor over a misplaced fence. It was a colossal military disaster that left Octavian poised to swoop in like a hawk over a battered rabbit. If Cleopatra and Antony were once the power couple of the Mediterranean, they were now more like a pop band whose last album had tanked. Octavian, the cunning opportunist, was already working his propaganda magic, painting Cleopatra as the ultimate femme fatale who had led Antony astray. According to him, she was less an alluring queen and more a sinister siren leading Rome's valiant general into a watery grave of disgrace. This narrative was as much about discrediting Antony as it was about undermining Cleopatra's legitimacy. It's a classic case of blame the woman, a narrative that's as old as time and just as infuriating. The propaganda war waged by Octavian was brutal and effective. He wasn't just playing to the Senate, he was speaking to the Roman public, crafting a story of a treacherous foreign queen who dared to challenge Rome's authority. Cleopatra, in his version of events, was not just an enemy of Antony, but an enemy of the state. And let's not forget, Octavian was no slouch in the propaganda department. He had coins minted depicting Cleopatra as a wicked enchantress, complete with all the subtlety of a tabloid headline. Meanwhile, Antony was portrayed as a weak-willed fool, ensnared by Cleopatra's charms. In reality, the decline of Cleopatra's power was less about exotic seduction and more about hard political currency. With the defeat at Actium, Cleopatra's strategic blunders were laid bare. She had gambled everything on Antony and lost. The vast fleet she commanded was supposed to be her trump card, but instead it became her Achilles' heel. The naval battle had been a disaster for Antony and Cleopatra, with their ships boxed in by Octavian's maneuverable fleet led by Agrippa. The Romans, utilizing their superior tactics and lighter ships, had outflanked them, turning what should have been a grand display of naval power into a chaotic retreat. The economic realities were equally grim. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, but the coffers were running low. Funding Antony's military ventures had drained resources faster than a leaky cistern. The Battle of Actium wasn't just a military defeat, it was an economic catastrophe. Without the support of a successful Roman general, Cleopatra's ability to maintain her hold over Egypt was crumbling like a poorly made sandcastle. The strategic blunders didn't stop at the naval front. Cleopatra and Antony had banked on their ability to rally support from other regions, but the political landscape was shifting under their feet. Many of their supposed allies were either sitting on the fence or defecting to Octavian's camp. In the high-stakes game of ancient geopolitics, loyalty was as fickle as the Mediterranean weather. As Octavian prepared to advance on Egypt, Cleopatra's options were dwindling. She was hemmed in not just by military threats, but by the weight of Roman public opinion, which Octavian had so deftly manipulated. If Cleopatra represented the last gasp of Hellenistic power, Octavian was the poster child for a new Roman order, one in which there was little room for rebellious queens. But Cleopatra wasn't about to roll over. Even with the odds stacked against her, she remained a formidable adversary. She sent envoys to negotiate with Octavian, offering to abdicate in favor of her children if he would spare Egypt from annexation. Yet Octavian, always the shrewd politician, had no intention of leaving loose ends. He was determined to consolidate his power and eliminate any threats to his burgeoning empire. In the midst of this turmoil, Antony was a shattered man. His dreams of Eastern conquest lay in ruins, and his relationship with Cleopatra was under immense strain. The once great Roman general was now a shadow of his former self, tormented by the specter of defeat. It's a sobering reminder that even the mightiest can fall, sometimes under the weight of their choices. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, was still plotting her next move. She barricaded herself in her mausoleum, a symbolic act that underscored her readiness to face death on her own terms rather than be paraded through Rome as a captive. It was a defiant gesture, a final stand against the inevitable tide. Meanwhile, Antony, in a tragic twist worthy of Shakespeare, took his own life, believing Cleopatra had already done the same. Cleopatra's endgame was rapidly approaching, and she was determined to face it with the same cunning that had defined her life. She was the last of the pharaohs, a queen whose reign was as turbulent as the Nile. Her story was about to reach its dramatic conclusion, but not before she made one final bid for survival. Stay tuned, because Cleopatra's legacy is about to take its place in the annals of history, a testament to her enduring allure and indomitable spirit. And so, Cleopatra stood on the precipice of history, facing her final act with the same tenacity that had propelled her through a life of power plays and political gambits. Here's a woman who danced with the titans of Rome, navigated treacherous waters, literal and metaphorical, and now found herself outmaneuvered by Octavian, the rising star of the Roman political firmament. Cleopatra's legacy was about to be sealed, not just by her actions, but by the myth that would swirl around her for millennia. Her death, whether by the bite of an asp or some other means, remains a tantalizing mystery. The snake story, as dramatic as it is dubious, has all the hallmarks of a tale too good not to tell. It paints Cleopatra as the ultimate tragic heroine, choosing a poetic demise over the indignity of a Roman triumph. But let's not gloss over the possibility that her death was a calculated act of defiance. Knowing Octavian's penchant for parading trophies of war through Rome, Cleopatra's suicide was her final power move, denying him the satisfaction of a living trophy. It's the kind of decision that speaks volumes about her character. She wasn't about to let her legacy be written by a Roman victor. In the aftermath of her death in 30 BCE, Cleopatra's kingdom was absorbed into the Roman Empire, marking the end of the Hellenistic period and the beginning of Roman domination in Egypt. This wasn't just a political shift, it was a seismic cultural transformation. Egypt, once the beacon of ancient civilization, was now a mere province, its vast wealth and resources plundered to fuel Rome's insatiable appetite for power. Economically, Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant stability and integration into Rome's vast trade networks. On the other hand, it signaled the end of Egyptian autonomy, with local resources redirected to benefit the Roman elite. The famous grain fields of Egypt, which had once fed Cleopatra's ambitions, now fed the masses of Rome. Cleopatra's clever manipulation of economic resources had once kept her in power, but in the end, those same resources became Rome's spoils. Politically, Cleopatra's reign was a masterclass in survival against overwhelming odds. Her ability to maintain power in a male-dominated world was nothing short of remarkable. She was a ruler who deftly wielded both charm and cunning, one of the few women in history to hold such sway over both her own kingdom and a foreign empire. Yet, her story was not just about personal ambition. It was about preserving her nation's identity amidst external pressures. Cleopatra's attempts to align with Rome, whether through Caesar or Antony, were ultimately about ensuring Egypt's survival in a world dominated by Roman expansionism. Her story didn't end with her death. It only began to be retold, reinterpreted, and mythologized in ways that reflected the biases and agendas of subsequent generations. Roman historians, eager to justify Octavian's actions, painted Cleopatra as the exotic temptress who ensnared noble Roman men. This narrative, propagated by figures like Plutarch and later Shakespeare, colored her legacy for centuries. Cleopatra became a symbol, a cautionary tale about the dangers of female power and ambition, a narrative that persists, albeit with less overt misogyny, even today. But let's not forget the realities beneath the romance. Cleopatra was a savvy political operator, not just a seductress. Her command of multiple languages, her understanding of Egyptian culture and religion, and her ability to navigate the complex politics of her time all point to a leader of extraordinary capability. She wasn't simply a pawn in Rome's game. She was a player in her own right, with her own agenda and aspirations. Culturally, Cleopatra's legacy endured through the ages, influencing art, literature, and even fashion. Her image as the quintessential queen, regal, mysterious, and powerful, captured the imaginations of artists and writers for generations. From the Renaissance to Hollywood, Cleopatra has been portrayed as everything from a femme fatale to a tragic heroine. Each retelling adds layers to her myth, making her one of history's most enigmatic figures. Her story is a testament to the power of narrative, how history remembers and reshapes its subjects to fit the needs of the present. In modern times, Cleopatra's legacy is undergoing a reassessment. Scholars and historians are peeling back the layers of myth to reveal a more nuanced portrait of a ruler who was both a product and a shaper of her time. The romanticized tales are giving way to a recognition of her as a complex leader navigating a world where the stakes were as high as they come. Cleopatra's life was a high-wire act of ambition and survival. Her legacy, though marred by Roman propaganda, remains a compelling story of a woman who refused to be relegated to the sidelines of history. She navigated the corridors of power with a blend of intelligence, diplomacy, and sheer will, leaving an indelible mark on the world she sought to rule. As we close the book on Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, we're reminded that history is as much about those who write it as it is about those who live it. Her story endures, a testament to the enduring allure of power, the complexities of leadership, and the indomitable spirit of a queen who dared to defy the odds. Cleopatra may have left the stage, but her legend lives on, a reminder that history is never quite as simple as it seems. In the grand theatre of medieval life, castles were the ultimate power move. These hulking stone fortresses weren't just homes, they were statements, like the medieval equivalent of owning a yacht, a private island, and a fancy title all rolled into one. Picture a time when calling someone neighborly might involve a trebuchet and some flaming arrows. Castles stood as the ultimate rebuttal to anyone who thought they could just drop by unannounced. Welcome to a world where architecture was as much about survival as it was about style. At their core, castles were about defense, and boy, did they take that job seriously. Forget about white picket fences. Try moats filled with water, or, if you were in the mood for theatrics, maybe even a few crocodiles. The moat was the first line of defense, a liquid barrier that said, "No, you can't just swim over here and pillage my pantry." But if someone did manage to cross this aquatic obstacle course, they'd face the curtain walls, towering up to 30 feet high and 10 feet thick. These walls were the medieval version of Do Not Disturb. Now, let's talk about those murder holes. Yes, that's a real thing and not the name of a heavy metal band. Imagine you're an unwelcome guest and you've somehow made it to the castle's gatehouse. Above you, there are holes in the ceiling, designed not for ventilation, but for the less than chivalric purpose of pouring boiling oil, rocks, or worse, to make you rethink your life choices. It was a heart welcome, literally and figuratively. Building one of these fortresses was no small feat. The cost of constructing a castle could range from 1,000 to 10,000 pounds, a small fortune in medieval times, equivalent to millions today. And maintaining it, well, that was like owning a fleet of Ferraris in terms of upkeep. Just to keep the castle in good repair might set a lord back a few £100 annually. That's a lot of chickens and grain, considering that a skilled craftsman earned about 3 pence a day. But not everything about castles was grim and gritty. There's a certain romance to the idea of a grand hall echoing with laughter and the clinking of goblets. Yet, let's not get too carried away. Those tapestries weren't just for show. They helped keep out the drafts in these chilly, stony abodes. The luxury of a fireplace was a big deal back then, a warm beacon in a world where people wore layers of wool for a reason. The grand hall was the social media of its day, where stories were told, deals were made, and everyone knew your business. A castle wasn't just a home. It was a multifunctional complex, serving as a residence, a military fortress, and a seat of local government. The lord of the castle was like the CEO, mayor, and head of the neighborhood watch rolled into one. Managing one of these places was akin to running a small country. A lord had to oversee everything from defense strategies to the grain harvest, while also navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics. And let's be real about those romantic tales of knights and tournaments. Sure, there were courtly love and dazzling feats of arms, but they were more the exception than the norm. Most days were filled with the mundane grind of administration and the ever-present threat of conflict. If you thought office politics were bad, try adding chainmail and sword fights to the mix. Ultimately, castles were the medieval answer to a lot of problems: political insecurity, hostile neighbors, and the need to display wealth and power. They were less about plush comfort and more about keeping your head, quite literally. In a world where alliances changed faster than the English weather, castles were the ultimate insurance policy against the whims of fate. They were a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder that sometimes the best way to say keep out is with a 30-foot wall. So, with our imposing stone fortress firmly established as both a medieval mansion and a military marvel, let's step inside and meet the lords and ladies who waltzed through these echoing halls. These folks were the medieval equivalent of today's billionaires, living in castles where every stone was a status symbol and every draft was a reminder of nature's indifference to social standing. First up, the lord of the castle. Picture him not as some idle noble lounging in luxury, but rather as a multitasking mogul. His day job, running the fiefdom, a term that sounds quaint until you realize it was essentially managing a small kingdom. Lord was the ultimate balancing act, part CEO, part military general, and part local magistrate. He was the guy who made sure the grain was harvested, the taxes were collected, and the local barons weren't plotting his untimely demise. His responsibilities were as vast as the lands he owned, but don't picture him doing this alone. He had a retinue of knights, stewards, and counselors who helped keep the gears of medieval life turning smoothly, or at least not falling apart entirely. But what about those feasts? Weren't these lords and ladies just throwing banquets every other night, sipping mead and tossing chicken bones over their shoulders? Well, yes and no. Feasting was indeed a favorite pastime, and it served as a crucial social function. These gatherings weren't just about indulgence. They were about networking in the days before LinkedIn. A good feast could secure alliances, settle disputes, and even lay the groundwork for marriages that combined wealth and influence. However, the everyday reality was far less glamorous. Most meals were simple, heavy on bread and meager on meat, unless you were celebrating or trying to impress a visiting dignitary. Now, let's talk numbers. Those lavish banquets, they could cost a small fortune. A grand feast might set a lord back around £20, equivalent to thousands of dollars today. It was a significant investment, considering that the annual income of a knight could be around £40. Balancing the books was no small feat, and lords had to be as skillful with their ledgers as they were with their swords. There was a constant tug-of-war between maintaining appearances and ensuring the fiefdom didn't go bankrupt. The lady of the castle, meanwhile, was no mere ornament. In a world where childbirth was dangerous and life expectancies were short, she might end up running the show if her husband was away at war, or worse, didn't make it back. Her responsibilities were extensive, managing the household, overseeing servants, and ensuring that everything from the kitchens to the tapestries ran smoothly. Ladies were often well-educated, with skills in reading, writing, and managing accounts, making them more akin to today's CFOs of family businesses than the passive figures we sometimes imagine. Then there were the children, often seen more as pawns in the game of dynastic chess than as individuals. Marriages were strategic alliances, and childhood was brief. Boys were packed off to other noble households to learn the art of knighthood or the subtleties of court politics, while girls were groomed for marriage and household management. By their mid-teens, they were expected to step into adult roles, ready or not. Let's not forget the political pressures these lords and ladies faced. While the castle walls might have kept out marauding armies, they did little to shield against the shifting sands of medieval politics. Allegiances could change as quickly as the seasons, and being on the wrong side of a power struggle could lead to a swift and often brutal downfall. The lord not only had to manage his estate, but also navigate the treacherous waters of feudal loyalty, where a slight misstep could result in a very public, very permanent career change. In this high-stakes game, the occasional joust wasn't just about chivalric glory. It was a chance to display skill, gain favor, and sometimes settle scores. But don't be fooled by the romanticized image of a knight in shining armor. Jousting was dangerous business, with knights clad in armor that could weigh up to 50 pounds, charging at each other like medieval missiles. It was as much about politics and prestige as it was about sport. All of this paints a picture of a life that was far from the idle luxury we often imagine. The lords and ladies of the castle were constantly juggling the demands of power, the complexities of medieval society, and the harsh realities of life in a world where famine, disease, and war were ever-present threats. They might have been the medieval 1%, but their lives were anything but carefree. Instead, they were a constant balancing act, a high-wire performance where one misstep could spell disaster. So next time you think of castles as the ultimate fairy tale homes, remember the lords and ladies who lived there, not just as figures of romance and legend, but as hardworking, often beleaguered individuals trying to keep their heads above water in a world that was as unforgiving as it was fascinating. And as we continue our journey through these stone fortresses, we'll delve deeper into the lives of those who served them, the unsung heroes who kept the wheels of medieval life turning, one day at a time. Now, as we dive deeper into the heart of the castle's bustling community, let's shine a light on the ones who actually made it tick, the servants. Picture them as the medieval version of today's backstage crew at a rock concert. The spotlight might be on the lords and ladies, but without the servants, the whole show would quickly fall apart. From the cook, wielding a ladle like a sword in the kitchen, to the jester, juggling both balls and the delicate art of comedy, each servant had a critical role. Let's start in the kitchen, the beating heart of any castle. The head cook was like the Gordon Ramsay of their time, minus the television cameras, but likely with the same level of stress. They managed a team of kitchen staff who prepared everything from the lord's grand banquets to the everyday gruel. Back then, cooking was no small feat. They dealt with open fires and cauldrons that could easily double as hot tubs for the unwary, and with spices worth their weight in gold. Literally, getting the seasoning right was crucial. A pinch too much, and you might find yourself out of a job, or worse, out of favor. Now, let's talk about wages. If you're imagining a nice paycheck with benefits, think again. Most servants, like the scullery maid or the stable boy, earned mere pennies a day. A skilled craftsman might earn 3 pence daily, while a lowly servant often got even less, frequently paid in room, board, and the pleasure of not being out in the fields. And when we say room, think less penthouse suite and more drafty attic shared with a dozen others. Privacy was a luxury only the stone walls could afford. The social hierarchy within the castle was a well-oiled machine of its own. At the top of the servant food chain was the steward, the lord's right-hand man, when it came to managing the estate. This guy was the original multitasker, overseeing everything from the grain inventory to the hiring and firing of staff. Think of him as the medieval equivalent of a corporate COO, managing chaos with a stern word and a sharp eye. Then there was the chamberlain, responsible for the lord's personal quarters, which was as much about maintaining security as it was about making sure the sheets were clean. A slip-up in this role could mean a swift exit, literally, through the castle gates. And let's not forget the laundress, whose job was less Downton Abbey and more medieval mud wrestling. With no washing machines, every load of laundry was a Herculean task, involving tubs, boiling water, and a lot of elbow grease. It's fair to say that cleanliness was next to godliness, but only if you had the manpower to scrub every last tunic and tabard. Of course, medieval castle wasn't just about work. There had to be some play too. Enter the jester, the original stand-up comedian, tasked with keeping spirits high and tensions low. But don't let the cap and bells fool you. This was a high-pressure gig. One wrong joke about the lord's latest haircut, and you might find yourself entertaining the dungeon rats instead. The jester was a master of social commentary, using humor to navigate the choppy waters of castle politics. Now, you might be wondering about the so-called benefits of being a servant. Did they get days off? Was there a medieval version of a 401? Not quite. Servants worked long hours, sunrise to sunset, with few breaks. Their lives were dictated by the seasons and the whims of their masters. If the lord decided to host a grand feast, you could bet every cook, server, and stable hand would be burning the midnight oil, literally. Despite the grueling work and low pay, being a servant in a castle did come with certain perks. For one, there was the relative safety of the castle's walls, a significant plus during times of war or unrest. And while the food might have been simple, it was certainly more reliable than what many peasants could expect. Plus, there was the chance, however slim, to rise through the ranks. A clever servant might catch the eye of a noble, earning a promotion or even a chance at a more comfortable life. Social mobility, however, was more pipe dream than reality for most. The rigid class system of the time meant that, for many servants, their station in life was as fixed as the stones of the castle they served. But that didn't stop them from dreaming or scheming. The annals of history are filled with stories of ambitious servants who managed to climb the social ladder, whether through marriage, intrigue, or sheer wit. In this bustling microcosm of medieval society, every role was essential. From the lowliest part boy to the highest-ranking steward, each person contributed to the castle's success and the lord's comfort. Their stories, often overlooked, are the threads that weave the rich tapestry of medieval life, reminding us that history's grand narratives are made up of countless individual tales. So, while the lord might be the face of the castle, it was the servants who were its hands and feet, toiling away in the shadows to keep the whole operation from tumbling down like a poorly stacked pile of firewood. As we continue our journey through the castle, let's remember these unsung heroes, whose lives were as complex and fascinating as the very walls they served within. And as we move on, let's keep our eyes peeled for those hidden nooks and crannies of history that tell tales of resilience, ambition, and the enduring human spirit. As we shift our gaze from the bustling life of servants, let's turn the spotlight on the knights in their shiny armor. These medieval icons, often immortalized in tales of chivalry and valor, were as much a product of good PR as they were of real-life battlefield prowess. Sure, they looked like walking tin cans ready to save the day, but peel back the layers of myth, and you'll find a reality that's less knight in shining armor and more armed and occasionally dangerous mercenary. Let's start by addressing the elephant, or rather the warhorse, in the room, chivalry. You've probably heard of it as the noble code of conduct requiring knights to be brave, courteous, and honorable. Sounds lovely, right? Well, in practice, chivalry was more like a medieval suggestion box than a binding contract. While the ideal knight was supposed to protect the weak and uphold justice, in reality, they were often more focused on securing their own power and wealth. Pillaging villages and extorting peasants were not exactly activities listed in the chivalric handbook, but they were common enough to make you question how many knights actually read the thing. Speaking of wealth, let's talk numbers. Becoming a knight was no small financial feat. The cost of outfitting a knight was staggering, around £40 for a full suit of armor alone, which in today's money would set you back tens of thousands of dollars. And that's not even counting the horse, the weapons, or the squire who had to lug it all around. It's safe to say that knighthood was a rich man's game, leaving many aspiring warriors jousting their way into debt. Now, armor might have been shiny but practical. Not so much. Imagine trying to fight a battle wearing what amounts to a medieval spacesuit. A full suit of plate armor could weigh up to 60 pounds, turning even the most agile warrior into a lumbering metal-clad tortoise. Sure, it offered protection, but it also made you a sitting duck if you ever found yourself unhorsed. And let's not even get started on the summer battles. Those things turned into portable saunas under the blazing sun. The knight's trusty steed was another status symbol. Warhorses, known as destriers, were the Ferraris of the medieval battlefield, expensive, high maintenance, and a nightmare if you didn't know how to handle them. A good warhorse could cost as much as a suit of armor, making them a prized possession. But despite the romanticized image of knights charging into battle, cavalry charges were rare and risky. Horses were valuable, and losing one in battle was as much a financial blow as a strategic one. On the battlefield, a knight's life was less about gallant charges and more about grueling hand-to-hand combat. Forget the choreographed elegance of a joust. Real battles were chaotic, bloody affairs where survival often depended on luck as much as skill. Honor codes might have existed, but when facing a wall of spears or a hail of arrows, pragmatism often won out over principles. It's no wonder that many knights emerged from battles more concerned with their spoils than their honor. And let's not romanticize the joust too much either. Sure, it was the medieval version of Monday night football, drawing crowds to watch armored warriors knock each other senseless. But for the knights, it was a dangerous game of high stakes and higher risks. Injuries were common, deaths not unheard of, and the political implications of losing a joust could be as damaging as the physical ones. A poor performance could tarnish a knight's reputation faster than a viral tweet. But what about those epic quests and damsels in distress? Well, quests were often more about securing land and wealth than slaying dragons. The damsels, they were sometimes less in distress and more in political alliances, with marriages bolstering family fortunes and influence. The knightly ideal of rescuing maidens was largely the stuff of romantic fiction, where the harsh realities of medieval life were conveniently glossed over. Speaking of fiction, let's not forget the role of troubadours and poets, the medieval spin doctors who turned the exploits of these warriors into legends. Their ballads and tales painted knights as paragons of virtue, conveniently leaving out the less savory details. In a time before social media, these stories were the influencers' marketing campaigns, shaping perceptions and turning flawed men into flawless heroes. Yet, for all their flaws, knights held an undeniable allure. They were the action heroes of the medieval world, embodying the ideals of courage and martial prowess. Their stories, however embellished, resonated with a society that valued strength and honor. Even today, we find ourselves drawn to the romance of the knightly archetype, despite knowing the gritty truths behind the gleaming facade. So, as we continue our journey through the world of medieval castles, let's keep both eyes open. The knights might have worn armor that shone like the sun, but beneath it lay the same human complexities and contradictions that have always defined history. In the next part of our saga, we'll delve deeper into those complexities, exploring how these warriors navigated a world where the line between hero and villain was as thin as a sword's edge. Stay tuned for a closer look at the intricate dance of medieval warfare, where strategy, politics, and human ambition clashed as fiercely as steel on the battlefield. As we embark on this final leg of our medieval journey, let's pivot from the clang of swords and the dazzle of chivalric spins to the slow, inevitable decline of the mighty stone fortresses that once dotted the landscape like imposing exclamation points. You see, castles were built as the ultimate 12th century security system, but by the time gunpowder swaggered onto the scene in the 15th century, these architectural marvels found themselves in a bit of an existential crisis. It was like being the proud owner of a top-of-the-line pager in the age of smartphones. So, what happened? Well, let's talk about gunpowder, the disruptive technology of its time. It was the medieval version of the internet, a game-changer that left traditional defenses about as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Introduced to Europe in the 13th century and used more prominently by the 14th century, gunpowder didn't just make battles noisier, it made them profoundly different. Cannons could now pulverize walls that had stood firm for centuries, turning once imposing fortresses into oversized rubble piles. Take the siege of Constantinople in 1453. The Ottoman Turks used massive cannons to breach the previously impregnable walls of the city, effectively announcing the beginning of the end for medieval fortifications. Economically, maintaining a castle was already a hefty burden. Remember those annual costs that could run a few £100s. Now, factor in the need to rebuild walls and fortifications regularly, and you've got yourself a money pit of epic proportions. Lords began to question whether investing in castles was worth the coin, particularly when a cannonball or two could turn their investment into a crumbled monument to past glories. Politically, the fall of castles mirrored broader shifts in power structures. The centralized authority of monarchies was on the rise, and with it, the reliance on professional standing armies over feudal levies. Castles, once symbols of a lord's autonomy and power, became less relevant as kings consolidated control. Why worry about maintaining your fortress when the king's army was a more formidable, mobile force? The age of the knight was ending, and with it, the era of the castle as a military necessity. Socially, the decline of the castle reflects a move towards more open, interconnected societies. Towns and cities began to flourish, becoming centers of trade and culture. The once isolated castle was now part of a broader tapestry of human interaction. In a sense, castles became the architectural equivalent of the landline, a relic of a time when communication and defense was more about physical barriers than interconnected networks. Romantically, however, castles never truly left us. They morphed from fortresses of cold stone and steel into symbols of a bygone era, their ruins dotting the landscape like skeletal remains of a once great beast. The appeal of castles shifted from practical to picturesque, inspiring poets, artists, and later, filmmakers to indulge in their mystique. Castles became the perfect backdrop for tales of romance and adventure, where the line between history and legend blurred more enthusiastically than a watercolor in the rain. Take the Château de Chambord in France, a castle so grand it looks like it was plucked straight from a fairy tale. Built during the Renaissance, It was more of a statement piece than a stronghold, a nod to the changing times when aesthetics began to trump defense. The grand halls and opulent designs were less about keeping invaders out and more about inviting admirers in. It's a testament to human nature, really. When faced with obsolescence, we often choose to reinvent our relics rather than discard them entirely. The legacy of castles is a curious mix of grandeur and grit. On one hand, they remain as bastions of architectural innovation and human ingenuity, reminders of a time when stone and mortar were the ultimate expressions of power. On the other, they stand as cautionary tales about the dangers of over-reliance on physical fortifications in a world that's always finding new ways to break down walls, both literal and metaphorical. In the end, the decline of castles is a story about adaptation and change, about how societies evolve in response to new challenges and opportunities. It's a reminder that every great structure, no matter how imposing, must eventually face the winds of change. And as we close the book on our castle tour, we're left with a legacy that's less about the stones themselves and more about the enduring human spirit that built them. So, as you dream of towers and turrets, remember the people who lived within them, lords and ladies, servants and knights, all playing their part in the grand human drama. Their stories may be etched in stone, but it's the tales of adaptation, ambition, and the relentless march of progress that truly endure. As you drift off to sleep, let the echoes of history guide your dreams, reminding you that in every ending lies the seed of a new beginning. And who knows, perhaps in the ruins of yesterday's castles, we'll find the blueprints for tomorrow's marvels. It was a world where the sky stretched endlessly, and the earth was as unforgiving as a Mongolian winter. In the heart of the steppes, where a good horse was worth more than a fine dinner, a boy named Temujin was born into the chaos of 1162. Now, if you're thinking his life was a fairy tale from rags to riches, hold your horses. Pun very much intended. Temujin's early life was more like a survival reality show with extra grit and fewer camera crews. Temujin's father, Yesujay, was a minor chieftain with big dreams and a taste for trouble. Legend has it that he named his son after a Tatar chieftain he'd captured, which is a bit like naming your kid after your favorite rival sports team's quarterback. But hey, in the steppes, you took your victories where you could find them. Yesujay wasn't exactly the king of the hill, but he did have a few loyal followers, and importantly, a wife named Holan, who was as tough as the terrain they called home. Tragedy came galloping into Temujin's life when he was just 9 years old. Yesujay was poisoned by the Tatars, proving once again that revenge is a dish best served cold, preferably with a side of deadly toxicity. Suddenly, young Temujin was thrust into the role of head of the family, with all the responsibility and zero of the perks. His family was abandoned by their clan faster than you can say yurt eviction. And just like that, they were left to fend for themselves against the elements and rival tribes. Survival in the steppes wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. The Mongolian steppes were a pressure cooker of political intrigue, with clans switching allegiances as often as they changed horses. Temujin, Holan, and the rest of the family were forced to eat roots and small game, with occasional mercy from wandering traders. If you think your last camping trip was rough, try doing it for years with marauding tribes breathing down your neck. But here's the kicker. While the family situation was dire, it was Temujin's relentless determination that began to shape his future. This kid wasn't just tough. He was practically forged from the same iron that made the Mongolian steppe so unyielding. He learned quickly that trust was a rare commodity, and that alliances, even the fickle ones, were a lifeline. Temujin's first real taste of leadership came when he was just in his teens. He was captured by a rival tribe, the Tayachiad, and rather than waiting for a rescue mission that wasn't coming, he staged a daring escape. Picture it, hands bound, escaping under the cover of night, and finding refuge with a sympathetic family. Talk about teenage rebellion with a purpose. This episode wasn't just another notch on his survival belt, it was the spark that fanned his ambition to unite the Mongol tribes. Speaking of tribes, let's explore the delightful world of 12th century Mongolia. It was a land of shifting loyalties, where your best friend one day could be your blood enemy the next. The socio-political climate was less about stable governance and more about who had the most horses and could rally the most warriors. The Mongols weren't just wanderers on horseback. They were a society deeply attuned to the rhythms of the land and the needs of their flocks. Temujin's early experiences taught him the value of building connections. One of his first strategic moves was marrying Bort, a match made not just in heaven, but in the practical, hard-nosed reality of tribal alliances. Bort came from the Alkanut tribe, and their marriage was as much about love as it was about political maneuvering, a necessity in a world where family ties could mean the difference between life and death. But it wasn't all smooth riding. Shortly after their marriage, Bort was kidnapped by the Merkits, a rival tribe with a penchant for abductions. Temujin, with a determination that would soon become legendary, allied with his blood brother Jamaka and his father-in-law Targrol, launching a rescue mission that was less knights in shining armor and more cavalry charge at dawn. Bort was rescued, and the Merkits got a lesson in the consequences of crossing Temujin. This rescue was pivotal, not just for Temujin's personal life, but as a demonstration of his emerging leadership and strategic acumen. It was a sign of things to come. Even in his youth, Temujin displayed a knack for turning personal grievances into broader political victories. It was this ability to see the big picture, to turn adversity into advantage, that set him on the path to uniting the Mongol tribes. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The road ahead for Temujin was paved with more betrayals, battles, and bloodshed than a Shakespearean tragedy. But in these early years, the foundation was laid. Temujin was not destined by some mystical prophecy to become Genghis Khan. He was molded by adversity, sharpened by betrayal, and driven by an unyielding will to carve out a future for himself and his people. As the steppes whispered their secrets to him, Temujin knew that to survive, he needed to unite the tribes under a single banner. Not an easy task when every chieftain with a horse and a dream thought he was the next big thing. But that, dear listener, is a tale for another time. For now, let's just say that young Temujin's life was a masterclass in resilience and resourcefulness, qualities that would one day shake the very foundations of the known world. As the steppes whispered their secrets to him, Temujin knew that to survive, he needed to unite the tribes under a single banner. Not an easy task when every chieftain with a horse and a dream thought he was the next big thing. Yet, what set Temujin apart was his ability to see the forest for the trees, or the steppe for the blades of grass, if you will. He wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rulebook. The thing about Mongolian tribal politics back then was that it made a high-stakes poker game look like a friendly match of Go Fish. Alliances were as stable as a sandcastle at high tide, with chieftains switching sides more often than you switch channels during a commercial break. But Temujin had a knack for reading people and situations, and he knew that to bring these tribes together, he had to offer them something more compelling than just a temporary alliance. He needed to offer them a vision. Enter the Kurultai of 1206. Now, if you're imagining this as some grand, sophisticated meeting of minds, hold that thought. The Kurultai was essentially a Mongolian mega-gathering where leaders came together to make big decisions, like who got to wear the fanciest hat, or, in this case, who would be the supreme ruler. It was less United Nations and more Game of Thrones, with less politeness and more horse sweat. And what a gathering it was. Picture the scene. Thousands of warriors, chieftains, and shamans gathered on the open steppe. Temujin was no longer just the scrappy kid who escaped the Teochead. He was now a seasoned leader with a reputation for cunning and ferocity. This was the moment where Temujin would be declared Genghis Khan, which translates to universal ruler. No pressure, right? But how did he pull it off? Temujin had been laying the groundwork for years, like an artist meticulously preparing a masterpiece. He had already crushed the Tatars, a formidable tribe that had a knack for poisoning people's fathers, a personal vendetta that Temujin turned into a strategic conquest. He didn't just defeat them, he obliterated them, ensuring that their name would be more of a cautionary tale than a threat. Then there were the Naimans and the Kerates, formidable tribes in their own right. Through a mix of military prowess, strategic marriages, and plain old intimidation, Temujin either absorbed them into his growing empire or ensured they were no longer a problem. His approach was simple yet effective. If you weren't with him, you were against him, and being against him often ended with you being nowhere at all. The Kurultai of 1206 was the culmination of all these efforts. It wasn't just a declaration of leadership, it was a statement of intent. Genghis Khan wasn't there to play nice. He was there to change the game entirely. And with his declaration, he wasn't just uniting tribes. He was creating a new identity for the Mongols, one that transcended individual loyalties and focused on collective strength. Now, about those military tactics that made him a legend. Genghis Khan was a master of the unexpected, a man who could turn a battlefield into his personal chessboard. His forces were known for their mobility, thanks to their reliance on horses. Each warrior often had several mounts, allowing them to travel vast distances at a speed that left their enemies breathless. We're talking about an army that could cover up to 100 miles a day, while most European armies were barely managing 20. But it wasn't just about speed. Genghis Khan's strategies were revolutionary. He employed a system of signaling using flags and a sophisticated relay system of riders that allowed him to coordinate complex maneuvers over long distances. His troops were organized into units of 10, called Arban, each with its own leader, fostering a level of discipline and cohesion that was the envy of any military force of the time. Genghis Khan also had a knack for psychological warfare. He'd send envoys to potential adversaries with a simple offer: submit and prosper, or resist and face annihilation. It wasn't an empty threat. Those who resisted often found their cities reduced to ashes, their populations scattered or absorbed into the Mongol ranks. Yet for those who surrendered, Genghis Khan could be surprisingly lenient, incorporating them into his empire and allowing them to maintain a degree of autonomy, so long as they paid their taxes and didn't cause trouble. Speaking of taxes, let's not forget the economic genius behind Genghis Khan's empire. Under his rule, trade flourished like never before. The Silk Road, that ancient web of trade routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean, became safer and more lucrative under Mongol oversight. Genghis Khan understood that wealth wasn't just measured in gold or silver, it was in the flow of goods and ideas. By ensuring that traders could move safely across his empire, he effectively boosted the economy, turning the Mongol Empire into a commercial powerhouse. And then there were the laws. Oh, those surprisingly progressive laws. Genghis Khan was no fan of chaos. He wanted order, and he made sure everyone knew it. The Yasa, a code of laws he established, was as much about justice as it was about control. It covered everything from military discipline to the rights of women and even religious tolerance. In a time when many societies were still figuring out the basics, Genghis Khan was out here ensuring that his subjects had a framework that promoted stability and growth. Managing a nomadic empire, however, was no small feat. The Mongols weren't building castles or setting up permanent settlements. They were on the move, constantly adapting to the challenges of the landscape and the needs of their people. But this flexibility was also their strength. It allowed Genghis Khan to respond swiftly to threats and opportunities alike, maintaining control over an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. In the end, Genghis Khan's rise to power wasn't just about being in the right place at the right time. It was his ability to see beyond the immediate, to understand the nuances of power and the importance of vision. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a unifier, a leader who could take the disparate threads of Mongolian society and weave them into a tapestry that would leave an indelible mark on history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Genghis Khan's story is far from over, and the challenges that lay ahead would test even his formidable skills. The Mongol Empire was still in its infancy, and while Genghis Khan had laid the foundation, there were many more battles to fight, alliances to forge, and yes, betrayals to endure. Stay tuned, because the saga of Genghis Khan is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As the Mongol Empire stretched its muscles and prepared for a continental road trip, Genghis Khan was already eyeing the next piece of real estate for his growing dominion. And boy, was it a big one. You see, by the time Genghis Khan had secured his hold over the Mongolian steppes, he wasn't just playing risk, he was redefining the board. First stop on the Mongol Express, northern China. The Jin dynasty had been ruling the roost there, thinking they'd built an impenetrable wall of fortifications that would make even the Great Wall blush. But Genghis Khan, never one to follow the script, had other ideas. His strategy was a classic Mongolian twist: bypass the defenses entirely and hit them where it hurt most. No drawn-out sieges here, just swift, relentless assaults that left the Jin forces reeling. By 1215, the Mongols had sacked the Jin capital of Jiangdu, modern-day Beijing, giving the empire a shiny new jewel in its crown. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a gentle transition of power. The Mongols were as subtle as a sledgehammer, and the city fell with all the grace of a collapsing yurt. Yet in the aftermath, Genghis Khan didn't just leave a trail of destruction. He implemented reforms that encouraged trade and restored stability. He wasn't just interested in breaking things. He wanted to build something lasting. Next on the conquest itinerary was Central Asia, a region that had seen more invaders than a medieval tavern saw brawls. The Khwarezmian Empire, a formidable trading power, had the misfortune of becoming Genghis Khan's next target. It all started with a diplomatic faux pas that would make any ambassador cringe. The Khwarezmian Shah executed Mongol envoys. That's the medieval equivalent of throwing a Molotov cocktail at a hornet's nest and expecting a thank you note. Genghis Khan's response was predictably swift and brutal. His forces descended upon the Khwarezmian cities with a fury that would give a hurricane an inferiority complex. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand fell one after the other, their defenses crumbling under the Mongol onslaught. The Mongols employed tactics that seemed ripped from a strategist's handbook: feigned retreats, surprise attacks, and psychological warfare that would make even Sun Tzu nod in approval. But let's take a moment to dissect the myth of Mongol brutality. Yes, the Mongols were terrifying in battle, and they didn't exactly hand out daisies to their enemies. But the narrative of mindless savagery often overshadows the method to their madness. Genghis Khan understood that fear was a weapon, one that could compel entire cities to surrender without a fight, thereby saving both time and resources. It was a strategy as cold as a Siberian winter, but undeniably effective. And here's the kicker. Genghis Khan wasn't just a warlord with a penchant for collecting cities like stamps. He was also a savvy diplomat. For those willing to bend the knee, he offered terms that focused on integration rather than annihilation. Local leaders were often left in place, and the populace was encouraged to continue their daily lives, just with a new Mongol flag flying overhead and a new tax collector knocking on their door. Speaking of taxes, let's shift gears to the economic engine that was the Mongol Empire. Under Genghis Khan's reign, the Silk Road became the 13th century equivalent of a bustling freeway. Trade caravans traversed his empire with a level of safety that was unheard of in those tumultuous times. Bandits, not on Genghis Khan's watch. The Mongol army ensured that traders could move goods from China to Europe with an ease that made the empire a commercial behemoth. The economic benefits weren't just a happy side effect. They were a calculated part of Genghis Khan's grand design. By controlling trade routes and ensuring their security, he effectively turned the Mongol Empire into a global marketplace, where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the steppe winds. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth for wealth's sake. It was about creating a stable, interconnected world that could support his growing ambitions. As the Mongol armies pushed further west, they encountered new cultures and challenges. The invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire had opened the door to Europe, and Genghis Khan wasn't one to ignore opportunity knocking. The Mongols marched into the Caucasus and even into the fringes of Eastern Europe, testing the mettle of kingdoms that had only heard whispers of the storm from the east. By 1223, the Mongols had crossed into the Kievan Rus territories, engaging in battles that would leave an indelible mark on the region's history. The Battle of the Kalka River. Oh, what a clash! The Mongols, with their nimble tactics and superior mobility, outmaneuvered the Rus forces, delivering a defeat that echoed through the annals of history like a thunderclap. Yet, amidst all the conquest and clashing steel, Genghis Khan was also laying the groundwork for a legacy that transcended mere territorial expansion. His laws, the Yasa, created a framework for governance that was surprisingly ahead of its time. Religious tolerance, protection for diplomats, and strict punishments for theft and treason were just part of this legal tapestry. It was a system designed to maintain order in an empire where diversity was the norm, not the exception. The Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan, became a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Scholars, artisans, and traders traveled its vast expanse, exchanging knowledge and goods in a way that would shape the future of civilizations. It was a time when the world seemed both vast and interconnected, as the lines between East and West blurred under the weight of Mongol influence. But let's not get too carried away with this rosy picture. The reality of Mongol rule was as complex as it was transformative. For every city that flourished under their protection, there was another that bore the scars of conquest. It was a duality that defined the Mongol legacy, a blend of destruction and creation, fear and prosperity. As Genghis Khan's empire expanded, so too did the challenges of managing such a vast territory. Communication across the sprawling domain required innovation, and Genghis Khan was nothing if not inventive. The Yam, a relay system of mounted couriers, allowed for rapid message delivery across the empire. Think of it as the medieval version of FedEx, albeit with more horses and fewer tracking numbers. Yet, even as the Yam riders galloped across the steppe, the challenges of governance loomed large. Genghis Khan understood that his empire's future depended on more than just military might. It required a cohesive vision, a sense of identity that could unite diverse peoples under a single banner. This vision was about more than just conquest. It was about creating a world where the Mongol identity was synonymous with power, stability, and innovation. It was a grand experiment in empire building, one that would test the limits of what was possible in a world that seemed, at times, too vast to tame. As Genghis Khan looked toward the future, he saw both possibility and peril. The empire he had forged from the steppes was a living testament to his vision and tenacity. Yet, the road ahead was fraught with danger, as new enemies emerged and old alliances faltered. The legacy of Genghis Khan was still being written, and the next chapter promised to be as tumultuous and transformative as the last. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Mongol Empire is far from over, and the stage is set for even more epic tales of conquest and cunning. As Genghis Khan looked toward the future, he saw both possibility and peril. The empire he had forged from the steppes was a living testament to his vision and tenacity. Yet the road ahead was fraught with danger, as new enemies emerged and old alliances faltered. The legacy of Genghis Khan was still being written, and the next chapter promised to be as tumultuous and transformative as the last. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Mongol Empire is far from over, and the stage is set for even more epic tales of conquest and cunning. Now, let's hit pause on the battlefield antics and pivot to something equally fascinating: Genghis Khan's administrative genius. You might think of him as a warlord with a penchant for pillaging, but beneath that fearsome exterior was a brain that worked like a high-speed abacus. At the heart of his governance was the Yasa, a legal code that was as essential to the Mongol Empire as horses and archery. Forget your local HOA rules. The Yasa was the real deal, covering everything from military discipline to the rights of women and the protection of foreign envoys. It was the glue that held together a sprawling empire, where diverse cultures and tongues blended like a medieval smoothie. The Yasa wasn't just a laundry list of do's and don'ts. It was a living document, adaptable to the needs of an ever-expanding empire. Its enforcement was rigorous. You could say it came with an implicit or else clause. Steal a horse. You might find yourself the star of a public execution. But here's the twist. It wasn't all doom and gloom. The Yasa also promoted religious tolerance, which was practically unheard of in a time when religious zeal often came with a side of crusades. Genghis Khan understood that happy subjects were less likely to revolt, and allowing them to keep their spiritual practices was a no-brainer. Speaking of happy subjects, let's talk trade. Under Genghis Khan, the Silk Road wasn't just a dusty caravan route. It was the equivalent of a medieval superhighway. The Mongol Empire put a premium on commerce, understanding that the flow of goods was the lifeblood of prosperity. Genghis Khan was less interested in hoarding gold and more focused on ensuring a bustling market economy. By securing trade routes and protecting merchants, he turned the Mongol Empire into a commercial powerhouse. Think of it as the first global economy, only with more camels and fewer stock exchanges. But an empire isn't run on trade alone. It needs communication, and fast. Enter the Yam system, a network of relay stations that made the Pony Express look like snail mail. The Yam was a marvel of logistical genius, with stations placed every 25 to 30 miles, offering fresh horses and provisions for messengers. This system allowed Genghis Khan to send orders across his vast realm with the speed of a Mongolian windstorm. It wasn't just about fast messages, it was about control. The yam ensured that Genghis Khan's grip on his empire was as firm as his hold on a bowstring. Now, let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. The yam didn't exactly come with a GPS, and maintaining such a network required a level of organization that would make even the most meticulous planner break into a sweat. But for Genghis Khan, it was a necessary investment. The ability to communicate quickly and reliably across thousands of miles meant that he could respond to threats with the agility of a steppe horse. It was a system that kept the empire humming along, even as it expanded faster than a Mongol cavalry charge. The Mongol Empire, for all its ferocity, was also a beacon of multicultural exchange. Under Genghis Khan's rule, the empire became a melting pot of ideas and innovations. Artisans, scholars, and traders moved freely across its vast expanse, bringing with them the seeds of progress. The Mongols weren't just conquerors, they were cultural curators, blending elements from the societies they absorbed into a unique tapestry. This exchange sowed the seeds for future stability and progress, as new technologies and ideas spread like wildfire. But let's keep it real. This wasn't some utopian dream. The Mongol Empire's cultural fluidity was as much about necessity as it was about enlightenment. Governing an empire that stretched across continents demanded a degree of pragmatism that Genghis Khan had in spades. He understood that integrating diverse cultures wasn't just a matter of benevolence. It was about building a cohesive society where people were less likely to stick a dagger in each other's backs. In this great Mongolian experiment, Genghis Khan's legacy was as much about governance as it was about conquest. He wasn't just the guy who stormed across Asia on horseback. He was a visionary who saw the potential in uniting disparate peoples under a single banner. His empire was a testament to the power of adaptability and innovation, a living laboratory where the boundaries of what was possible were constantly being pushed. As we ride through the annals of history, the Mongol Empire stands as a monument to the complexity of human ambition. It was a realm where the past and future collided, forging a new world order that would shape the course of history. And while Genghis Khan's story is far from over, his legacy is a reminder that even the most brutal conquerors can have a soft spot for administration and trade, proving once and for all that the pen and the legal code can be mightier than the sword. As we gallop into the final chapter of Genghis Khan's saga, let's address the elephant, more like a herd of Mongolian horses, in the room, his death. In 1227, the mighty Genghis Khan shuffled off this mortal coil, leaving behind an empire that stretched across a whopping 9 million square miles. That's roughly the size of Africa, folks. Quite the legacy for a kid who started out dodging poisoned arrows and eating roots. But what happens when the man who united the steppe and beyond suddenly checks out? Spoiler alert. Chaos, intrigue, and a family drama that would make a soap opera look tame. Genghis Khan's death didn't just leave a power vacuum, it left a gaping maw of succession issues. Divide and conquer might work on the battlefield, but dividing an empire among your sons, that's a recipe for a Thanksgiving dinner gone horribly wrong. Enter the 4 sons, Jarchai, Chagatai, Ojdai, and Talui. Each was given a chunk of the empire, like slices of a particularly ambitious pie. Ojdai, the 3rd son, was named the Great Khan, the head honcho, the top dog. But here's the kicker. Genghis Khan's vision wasn't just about who got the biggest slice. It was about keeping the whole pie from crumbling under its own weight. Ojdai, bless his ambitious heart, didn't just want to sit on his throne and count his yaks. He continued expanding the empire, pushing the Mongol borders further into China and Europe. Under his watch, the Mongol Empire reached its zenith, stretching from Korea to Hungary. That's what you call a continental road trip. But let's talk economics for a hot second. The Mongol Empire under Ojdai thrived because it wasn't just about conquest, it was about commerce. Trade flourished like never before, thanks to the Mongols' relentless focus on securing and expanding trade routes. This wasn't some accidental side effect, it was a calculated strategy. The Mongols understood that wealth wasn't just about land, it was about the goods that flowed across it. Think of it as the original global marketplace, where silk, spices, and ideas traveled faster than gossip at a royal court. Yet, for all its prosperity, the Mongol Empire was held together by more than just trade. Genghis Khan's Yasa, his code of laws, continued to be the backbone of governance. It was a legal framework that ensured order in a realm that was as diverse as it was expansive. But even the best laws can't quell the ambitions of those who crave power. The unity Genghis Khan had forged was tested time and again, as rivalries and disputes erupted like geysers across the empire. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The Mongol Empire wasn't some utopia where everyone held hands and sang Kumbaya. It was a realm built on conquest and maintained through a delicate balance of power. As the Mongol elite bickered over territory and titles, the empire began to show cracks. The unity that Genghis Khan had worked so hard to build was fraying at the edges. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the internal squabbles, the Mongol Empire's legacy was far from tarnished. Its impact on the world was profound, reshaping cultures and economies in ways that are still felt today. The Mongols didn't just conquer, they connected. They bridged east and west, fostering an exchange of ideas and innovations that would lay the groundwork for the Renaissance and beyond. Let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. Genghis Khan is often painted as a barbaric warlord, a destroyer rather than a builder. But the truth is more nuanced. Yes, he was a fearsome conqueror, but he was also a unifier, a leader who understood the power of vision and adaptability. His empire was a testament to the potential of human ambition, a realm where the old world met the new in a clash of cultures that would redefine history. And what about the man himself? Genghis Khan's legacy is a paradox, a blend of romanticized legend and raw reality. He was a man who rose from obscurity to become one of history's most formidable leaders. His story is one of resilience, of a person who turned adversity into opportunity, who saw possibilities where others saw only obstacles. In the end, the Mongol Empire was more than just a collection of conquered lands. It was a melting pot of cultures, a catalyst for change that challenged the status quo and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Genghis Khan's legacy is a reminder that leadership isn't just about power. It's about vision, about seeing the big picture, and having the tenacity to make it a reality. As we wrap up this odyssey through the life and legacy of Genghis Khan, let's challenge ourselves to rethink what leadership means. It's not just about wielding authority, it's about forging connections, about seeing potential where others see only chaos. Genghis Khan's empire may have crumbled, but his impact endures, a testament to the complexity of human ambition and the enduring power of vision. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. Genghis Khan's story is a tapestry of contradictions, a fusion of myth and history that defies easy categorization. He was a conqueror and a builder, a destroyer and a unifier. His legacy is a reminder that history is never black and white, but a complex web of narratives that continue to shape our world. And isn't that the most fascinating part of all? Once upon a time in ancient Egypt, the land of pharaohs and epic tales, a royal power couple emerged that would shake the very foundations of their civilization. Meet Nefertiti and Akhenaten, the Bey and Jay-Z of the 14th century BCE. Their union wasn't just a marriage. It was a political and religious revolution on a scale that would make any modern influencer green with envy. Nefertiti, whose name means the beautiful one has come, wasn't just a pretty face gracing the walls of tombs with her iconic bust. She was a co-ruler with Akhenaten, wielding influence like a boss. Around 1353 BCE, she entered the political scene through marriage, a move that catapulted her into a sphere of power and influence far beyond the typical role of a queen consort. Together, they embarked on a mission that would rattle the cages of the established religious order and set Egypt on a new course toward monotheism. Now, let's break this down. Ancient Egypt was as polytheistic as it gets, with a pantheon of gods more crowded than an Egyptian bazaar on market day. Yet Akhenaten, in a move that defies all ancient logic, decided to scrap the whole divine ensemble in favor of a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. Bold, absolutely. Reckless, perhaps. But it was a decision that had the potential to change everything: politics, economy, society, and of course, the architecture. The economic implications were staggering. Akhenaten didn't just want to worship Aten, he wanted to build a whole new city dedicated to this god. Enter Akhetaten, or modern-day Amarna, a city constructed at breakneck speed on virgin land, which was about as practical as building a skyscraper on a sand dune. It was a massive undertaking that required significant resources. The construction involved hauling limestone blocks across the Nile and assembling a workforce that could rival the population of a small country. The city stretched over 8 miles along the Nile, filled with temples, palaces, and homes for those who dared to follow the new religious order. This ambitious project wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was an economic gamble. Draining resources for the construction of Akhenaten meant diverting funds away from traditional temples, which were the economic engines of ancient Egypt. Temples at Thebes and Memphis found themselves sidelined, and the priesthoods, accustomed to wielding enormous power, suddenly faced a crisis of relevance. Picture a modern-day corporation suddenly told that its services are no longer needed because the boss has a new favorite app. And here's the kicker. The priests weren't just spiritual guides. They were power brokers, managing vast lands and resources. By sidelining them, Akhenaten and Nefertiti were effectively shaking the economic foundations of Egypt. This was like telling the Wall Street bankers of the time that their services were no longer required because someone invented cryptocurrency. The backlash was inevitable. Traditionalists were about as happy as cats in a bath, and the scribes, who had to rewrite religious texts, probably needed a stiff drink. But Nefertiti and Akhenaten were undeterred, pushing forward with their vision. The city of Akhenaten rose from the desert like a mirage, a symbol of their new world order. Yet, the harsh reality was that monotheism just didn't resonate with the majority of Egyptians. They liked their gods like they liked their bread, plentiful and varied. The shift to Atenism was too radical, too fast, and too unfamiliar. Even Akhenaten's own officials were likely muttering curses under their breath while putting on a brave face. Nefertiti, though, was no passive observer in this drama. She was depicted in art, standing beside Akhenaten, often in the same size and posture, which was a big deal considering artistic conventions of the time. She participated in state affairs and religious ceremonies, showcasing her as a figure of authority rather than a mere ornament. This was a radical departure from the norm, where queens were typically seen as background players in the grand theater of Egyptian politics. And let's not forget the familial aspect. Nefertiti and Akhenaten had 6 daughters, who were often depicted in family scenes, highlighting the royal family's central role in the new religious order. Yet, even within the family, there were whispers of intrigue and drama that would give any soap opera a run for its money. As the sun set on Akhenaten and the Aten's rays faded into the horizon, the seeds of discontent were already sown. The city's grandeur and the royal couple's vision were undeniable, but so were the economic and political challenges they had unleashed. Nefertiti's rise to power and her partnership with Akhenaten were groundbreaking, but the reality was as complex and multifaceted as the land of Egypt itself. In the end, Nefertiti's story isn't just one of beauty or power. It's a testament to ambition and the audacious gamble of rewriting the rules of an ancient society. Whether their revolution was a success or a failure depends on whom you ask, but one thing is for sure. Nefertiti and Akhenaten were no ordinary rulers. They were trailblazers in a world that was desperately trying to hold on to its past, and their legacy, though shrouded in the sands of time, continues to fascinate and puzzle historians to this day. Nefertiti's story doesn't just end with the shimmering mirage of Akhenaten or the controversial religious reforms that rattled the old guard's cages. No, our leading lady was more than just her husband's right-hand woman or the face that adorned countless ancient Instagram-worthy busts. She was a political powerhouse in her own right, cutting through the patriarchal norms like a hot knife through butter. The ancient Egyptian world, with its rigid gender roles, was about as welcoming to a powerful queen as a lion to a gazelle. Yet, Nefertiti managed to carve out a space for herself not just as a consort, but as a co-ruler, a feat that was rarer than a sunny day in London. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty of Nefertiti's political influence. We're talking about a queen who didn't just sit pretty on the throne, waving her bejeweled hand like a pageant winner. No, she was in the thick of it, actively participating in state affairs, a role practically unheard of for queens back in the day. Evidence of this comes from the Ammon period reliefs, where she's depicted wearing the blue crown, an image reserved for the pharaoh himself. This wasn't just a fashion statement. It was an ancient power suit, signaling her possible co-regency with Akhenaten, was akin to seeing the First Lady wearing the President's Air Force One jacket and striding into a meeting with foreign dignitaries. Speaking of foreign relations, Nefertiti wasn't just twiddling her thumbs, while Akhenaten was busy sunbathing under Aten's rays. She was a diplomatic ace, juggling correspondence with other rulers like a pro. The Amarna letters, a treasure trove of clay tablets, reveal a side of Nefertiti that would make any modern diplomat proud or envious. These letters, written in Akkadian, the lingua franca of the time, show Nefertiti's sharp diplomatic acumen. She was involved in intense, occasionally humorous exchanges with foreign leaders, like a stern headmistress dealing with a classroom full of unruly students. Take, for instance, the correspondence with Tushratta, the king of Mitanni. He wasn't just sending over friendly postcards. He was bombarding the royal couple with requests and complaints, mostly about dowries and gold. Tushratta's letters were about as subtle as a sledgehammer, often demanding more gold than a pirate's treasure chest. Nefertiti's responses, though not directly recorded, can be imagined as diplomatic masterpieces, balancing charm, wit, and the occasional eye roll. It's a classic case of give them an inch, and they'll take a mile, with Nefertiti deftly managing these international relations like a seasoned pro. But why did this matter so much? Well, in the chess game of ancient geopolitics, Egypt was the king on the board, and Nefertiti played a critical role in ensuring Egypt's dominance in the region. Her active participation in foreign policy wasn't just a power flex. It was about securing Egypt's economic and military interests. Gold, horses, and alliances were the currency of power, and Nefertiti was making sure that Egypt had a full wallet and a well-fed stable. Yet, her influence wasn't just confined to the royal court or international affairs. Within Egypt, she was a symbol of the new religious order. The imagery of Nefertiti and Akhenaten worshipping Aten together wasn't just artistic flair. It was propaganda, plain and simple. It was like plastering their royal Instagram feed with couple selfies, showing the world a united front, both politically and spiritually. This was their new world order, a fusion of politics and religion with Nefertiti at its core. So, was Nefertiti just a pretty face in the annals of history? Hardly. She was a trailblazer, a diplomat, and possibly a co-regent, wielding a level of power that would make most ancient queens gasp. Yet, the sands of time have a way of erasing the sharp edges of history, leaving us with tantalizing glimpses of her true role. Her legacy, though partly obscured, tells the story of a woman who wasn't content to play second fiddle. She was the lead guitarist, strumming the chords of power with finesse and daring. As the sun set on the horizon of Akhenaten, Nefertiti's influence continued to echo through the corridors of power. Her story is a testament to the complexities of female power in a male-dominated world, an ancient tale that still resonates in today's battles for gender equality and leadership. And as we delve deeper into her life, one thing becomes clear. Nefertiti wasn't just a queen. She was a force of nature, a political and diplomatic whirlwind in an era that preferred its women silent and ornamental. Her story, much like the sands of Egypt, is still shifting, revealing new facets with every turn. And trust me, there's more to uncover in the chapters ahead. As we journey further into the life of Nefertiti, let's tackle the elephant in the room, her fabled beauty. If you've ever browsed the ancient art section of your local museum, you've likely come across the famous bust of Nefertiti. Crafted in 1345 BCE by the skilled hands of Thutmose, it stands as one of the most iconic images of antiquity. But let's hit pause for a sec. Was Nefertiti truly the supermodel of the Nile, or was the bust more of a carefully crafted PR stunt? The bust, discovered in the ruins of Amarna, seems to scream, "Look at me," with an elegance that could rival any modern-day magazine cover. With its regal posture, symmetrical features, and that enigmatic smile, it's no wonder people are captivated. But remember, folks, this is ancient Egypt we're talking about, a civilization that practically invented the concept of image management. You see, the Egyptians were masters of spin long before the term even existed. It's entirely possible that the bust was designed not just to capture Nefertiti's visage, but to project an idealized version of her. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Nefertiti was the Mona Lisa of Photoshop, but the artistry behind the bust speaks volumes. Thutmose, the sculptor, was a genius of his time, and his workshop churned out works that were less about realism and more about conveying divine perfection. In a society where pharaohs were seen as god kings, Nefertiti's image would have been carefully curated to reflect her semi-divine status. She wasn't just any queen, she was a living goddess. So, was the bust a true reflection of her appearance, or was it ancient Egypt's version of an Instagram filter? A little bit of both, perhaps. And let's not forget societal standards of beauty in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians had their own ideas about what constituted attractiveness, symmetry, youthfulness, and a certain ethereal quality that suggested a connection to the divine. The bust embodies these ideals, making it the perfect piece of propaganda. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about looking powerful, approachable, and divinely sanctioned. Nefertiti's beauty, therefore, wasn't just skin-deep, it was a tool of statecraft. But why should we care about the aesthetics of a 300-year-old bust? Well, it tells us something essential about power dynamics and gender roles in ancient Egypt. The emphasis on Nefertiti's beauty was partly a reflection of her political clout. Her image, both in art and in life, challenged the status quo, presenting a queen who wasn't merely a decorative figure, but an active participant in the political and religious life of the kingdom. The bust was a visual declaration of her authority, a reminder that beauty and power were intricately linked in the tapestry of ancient Egyptian culture. Yet, beauty is only one facet of Nefertiti's legacy. The real question is, how much of her influence was due to her looks, and how much was due to her savvy political maneuvering? While her beauty certainly helped cement her place in history, it was her intellect and strategic prowess that truly set her apart. Nefertiti knew how to play the game, using her image as a stepping stone to wield real power. In the grand scheme of things, Nefertiti's beauty myth is a captivating story, but it's only part of her complex narrative. Her legacy is a testament to the multifaceted nature of power, where image and influence often intertwine. And as much as we love a good beauty myth, it's crucial to peel back the layers and appreciate the woman behind the legend. Because at the end of the day, Nefertiti wasn't just a beautiful face, she was a force to be reckoned with. As we continue to dig into her story, let's keep in mind the power of perception. In a world dominated by men, Nefertiti's carefully crafted image allowed her to step into a realm of influence that was typically off-limits to women. Her beauty was not just a physical trait, but a political asset, wielded with the same precision as any sword or scepter. And while her bust remains a symbol of timeless allure, it's her role as a trailblazer that truly captivates the imagination. So, stay tuned, because the sands of time still have more secrets to reveal about this remarkable queen. With every turn, we uncover new layers of her story, reminding us that history is never as simple as it seems. As we delve deeper into the annals of Nefertiti's life, one thing is clear. Her beauty may have caught the world's eye, but it was her intelligence and ambition that left an indelible mark on history. And who knows what other surprises are waiting to be unearthed in the next chapter of her extraordinary tale. As we continue our deep dive into the saga of Nefertiti, let's address the ancient world's version of a vanishing act Houdini would envy. Her sudden disappearance from the historical record around 1336 BCE. 1 minute she's co-ruling Egypt like a boss. The next, it's as if she slipped out the back door of history, leaving nothing but dusty whispers and a trail of hieroglyphic breadcrumbs. Now, why did Queen Nefertiti, the ancient superstar, pull a vanishing act that would make any magician proud? It's a question that has left historians scratching their heads and clutching their papyrus scrolls for centuries. Let's unravel this enigma, shall we? First, let's talk about the theories. If ancient Egypt were a soap opera, and let's face it, with its palace intrigue and family drama, it practically was, Nefertiti's disappearance would be the cliffhanger of the season. One theory suggests that she changed her name and continued to rule as a co-pharaoh under a new guise. You see, Nefertiti might have pulled a Beyoncé and rebranded herself as Nefertiti, possibly even taking on the role of a co-regent with Akhenaten. It's a bit like changing your username, but keeping your follow account. The name Nefertiti, which amusingly translates to beautiful or the beauties of Aten, appears in inscriptions from the latter part of Akhenaten's reign. Some scholars speculate that this alter ego allowed Nefertiti to wield power in a more direct capacity, perhaps even adopting male pharaonic titles. This theory paints her not just as a queen, but as a cunning political player who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of Egyptian politics like a pro. Yet, like any good mystery, there are other tantalizing theories. Another possibility is that Nefertiti simply faded from power due to political shifts. By around 1336 BCE, the winds of change were blowing through Egypt like a sandstorm. The Eightenist revolution, with its radical monotheism, was losing its luster, and traditionalists were itching to return to the good old days of polytheism. It's as if the Egyptians collectively decided they missed their pantheon of gods more than a nostalgic ex. Amidst this tectonic shift, Nefertiti might have found herself increasingly sidelined, her influence waning like the setting sun over the Nile. The political climate was as volatile as a Twitter feud, and if Nefertiti was no longer seen as a necessary part of the ruling equation, she could have been gently, or not so gently, pushed aside. Meanwhile, let's not forget Egypt's own Game of Thrones, the succession crisis. Akhenaten's death around 1334 BCE left a power vacuum bigger than the Great Pyramid itself. Enter Tutankhamun, the boy king, who would eventually restore the traditional religious order, effectively putting a nail in the Eightenist coffin. Nefertiti's potential role in this transition remains a tantalizing question mark. Was she a guiding hand behind the scenes, or did she retire to a life of relative obscurity, watching the drama unfold from a safe distance? It's also worth considering the possibility of her untimely demise. In an era where life expectancy was often cut short by disease, childbirth, or palace intrigue, Nefertiti might have simply succumbed to fate's whims. The sands of Egypt are littered with stories of rulers who met their end in both mundane and mysterious ways. If she did indeed pass away, the lack of surviving records could be chalked up to the chaotic period that followed, where the focus was more on restoring old customs than preserving the legacy of a controversial queen. But let's not forget the most human of factors: power struggles and ego clashes that could rival any reality TV show. Nefertiti's disappearance might have been the result of court politics gone awry, where alliances shifted like desert sands, and yesterday's ally became today's rival. The Ammon period was a time of great upheaval, and amid the chaos, Nefertiti might have found herself outmaneuvered, outflanked, or simply out of favor. Whatever the reason for her disappearance, one thing is certain: Nefertiti's legacy was subject to the whims of those who came after. The return to traditional religious practices under Tutankhamun was a political statement as much as a spiritual one. It was a rejection of the radical changes brought about by Akhenaten and, by extension, Nefertiti. In this new old order, there was little room for the memory of a queen who had dared to challenge the status quo. Yet, despite the erasure, Nefertiti's story didn't end with her removal from the historical scene. The mystery of her disappearance only adds to the allure and intrigue surrounding her life. While the sands of time might have obscured her fate, they have not diminished her impact. Nefertiti remains a figure of fascination, a testament to the complexities of power and the enduring allure of mystery. In the end, Nefertiti's story is a reminder that history is as much about what is left unsaid as what is recorded. Her disappearance from the historical stage leaves us with more questions than answers, but perhaps that's the point. The enigmatic nature of her fate invites us to ponder the intricacies of human ambition, the fickle nature of power, and the ever-shifting sands of history. As we prepare to delve into the final act of Nefertiti's saga, let's remember that the past is never truly past. It lingers in the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered, reinterpreted, and reimagined. Nefertiti's disappearance might be shrouded in mystery, but her legacy continues to captivate and inspire, proving that some stories are destined to endure, no matter how elusive their endings may be. Ah, Nefertiti. Her name still echoes through the corridors of history, not just as a paragon of beauty, but as a woman who wielded influence with the finesse of a maestro conducting a symphony. Let's peel back the layers of her story to understand her lasting impact. Spoiler alert, it's not just about cheekbones that could cut glass. To truly appreciate Nefertiti's legacy, we must step beyond the limestone bust that launched 1,000 postcards and delve into the world she helped shape. Her political savvy was not just a footnote in Akhenaten's grand religious experiment. It was central to the upheaval that defined their reign. Together, they were the Barney and Clyde of ancient Egypt, challenging the entrenched religious order with audacity that would make even the boldest social media influencer blush. Their move to monotheism wasn't just a spiritual makeover. It was a seismic shift that rattled the very foundations of Egyptian society. Imagine if today, a government suddenly decided that only one app would be allowed on all smartphones, and that app was so new it didn't even have a user base yet. That's the kind of radical change Akhenaten and Nefertiti were gunning for with their Aten-centric faith. It wasn't just about worshipping a new god. It was about redistributing power, wealth, and influence. The traditional temple complexes were not just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses that controlled vast tracts of land, resources, and manpower. By shifting focus to Aten, Nefertiti and Akhenaten were essentially redirecting the economic lifeblood of the nation. It was a bold move, akin to reallocating the national budget from established industries to a single, untested venture. Talk about putting all your eggs in one sun disk. Nefertiti wasn't just a silent partner in this radical scheme. She was depicted as Akhenaten's equal in numerous reliefs, underscoring her active role in the state's affairs. This wasn't a time when women were often seen, let alone heard, in the corridors of power. Yet there she was, wearing the pharaoh's regalia, participating in religious ceremonies, and engaging in diplomatic correspondence. She wasn't just leaning in, she was doing a full dive into the deep end of political life. Speaking of diplomacy, let's not forget the Amarna letters, those ancient clay tablets that read like the world's oldest email chain. Nefertiti's engagement with foreign leaders was more than just polite exchanges. It was strategic networking at its finest. She understood that maintaining Egypt's geopolitical influence was as important as any internal religious reform. It's like she had her own ancient LinkedIn, making sure Egypt's connections were just as rock-solid as its pyramids. And let's talk about her daughters, 6 of them, each a potential piece in the political chessboard of Egyptian alliances. While Nefertiti's sons-in-law might have been the more public figures, her daughters were key to establishing diplomatic ties. In a world where marriages were as much about politics as they were about love, and let's be honest, probably more, her offspring were vital to maintaining the balance of power. It was like having a royal family lineup that doubled as a diplomatic toolkit. Now, onto the myth-busting. While Nefertiti's beauty is often what captures our imagination, it's a red herring when it comes to understanding her true legacy. Yes, her bust is iconic, but it's her role in one of the most radical religious and political shifts in ancient history that deserves the spotlight. Her allure was not just physical, it was the kind that shaped nations and altered the course of history. Her beauty was a tool, a political asset that helped project the image of a divinely sanctioned ruler, but it was her intellect and strategic prowess that truly set her apart. As we wrap up this historical whirlwind tour, consider this. Nefertiti's legacy is a testament to the power of ambition and vision. She was a woman who stepped out of the shadow of her husband and left an indelible mark on one of history's most fascinating eras. While the sands of time may have obscured some details of her life, her story remains a compelling narrative of power, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of change. So next time you glimpse her famous bust, remember that behind those serene features was a mind as sharp as any pharaoh's sword, a woman who dared to rule not just alongside her husband, but in her own right. Her beauty may have captured the world's gaze, but it was her intellect and ambition that secured her place in history. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, Nefertiti was not just a queen, she was a trailblazer, a force of nature whose legacy continues to inspire and intrigue us today. In the shadow of the rugged Corsican mountains, where goats were plentiful and ambition was rare, a scrappy boy named Napoleon de Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769. Now, Corsica may not seem like the starting point for one of history's most notorious conquerors, but life has a knack for casting unlikely protagonists. This island, more famous for olive oil than empire builders, was Napoleon's cradle. With a name as grandiose as a Roman emperor and a family as financially strapped as a modern-day grad student, young Napoleon had his work cut out for him. The Bonaparte family wasn't exactly rolling in dough, but they had connections, and in the 18th century, that was often worth more than gold coins. Carlo Bonaparte, Napoleon's father, was a lawyer who schmoozed his way into the good graces of Corsican nobility. If networking was an Olympic sport, Carlo would have had a gold medal hanging from his neck. His status as a representative to the court of Louis Roman XVI was like getting a VIP pass at a music festival, except this festival was the French monarchy and the headliner was a guillotine. Napoleon was one of 8 siblings, which meant the Bonaparte household was like a live-action sitcom. In this bustling home, young Napoleon quickly learned the art of standing out. He wasn't the eldest, that was Joseph. He wasn't the youngest, that was Jerome. But what he lacked in birth order, he made up for with a personality that could only be described as larger than life, a term that would become hilariously ironic considering the myths about his stature. Speaking of which, let's address the elephant in the historical room, Napoleon's height. The legend of him being vertically challenged is about as accurate as a pirate's map. In reality, he stood about 5'6" or 5'7", perfectly average for his time. The misconception likely stems from the British, who, let's be honest, weren't exactly his biggest fans. They loved to paint him as a pint-sized tyrant to diminish his grandeur. It was less about his physical height and more about cutting him down to size metaphorically. So, Napoleon's supposed shortness, a tall tale spun by his adversaries. Back to the family dynamics. Among the Bonapartes, Napoleon was known for his fiery temperament and relentless ambition. He wasn't the kind of kid who'd be content with just another day herding sheep. No, his eyes were set on bigger pastures, the kind that stretched across continents. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, was a formidable woman who instilled in her children the value of discipline and frugality. She was the sort of mom who'd probably make you finish your vegetables and then quiz you on European geography for dessert. Napoleon's road to glory began not with a bang, but with a scholarship. The French government, in a moment of generosity, or perhaps divine foresight, offered him a spot at the prestigious military school of Brienne-le-Chateau in mainland France. Imagine sending a kid from the rustic charm of Corsica to the sophisticated corridors of French academia. It was like trading in a wooden sword for a steel rapier, both exciting and terrifying. At Brienne, Napoleon was the quintessential fish out of water. He was a Corsican kid in a French institution, and the cultural gap was as wide as the English Channel. His accent was thick, his French was less than polished, and he found himself the target of ridicule. Some might have wilted under the pressure, but Napoleon took it in stride, using every slight to fuel his determination. He was like Rocky Balboa training for a boxing match, only his ring was Europe, and his gloves were a sharp mind and sharper ambition. Napoleon didn't just survive at Brienne, he thrived. He was the kind of student who didn't just take notes, he devoured knowledge. Mathematics, history, geography, he tackled them all with the same ferocity he'd later use on the battlefield. One of his teachers noted that he was always distinguished for the ardor of his feelings and the vivacity of his imagination. Translation: this kid was going places. In 1784, Napoleon graduated from Brienne and was admitted to the École Militaire in Paris, the French equivalent of West Point. He was the first Corsican to be admitted, a testament to his tenacity, and perhaps a foreshadowing of his trailblazing career. However, his time at the École Militaire was cut short due to his father's death in 1785. Carlo's passing left the family in financial straits, a harsh reminder that even future emperors aren't immune to life's sucker punches. Napoleon completed his studies in just a year rather than the standard 2, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. Why artillery, you ask? Because Napoleon recognized early on that artillery was the future of warfare. It was the perfect blend of science and destruction, and he was keen to master both. This decision was as strategic as it was practical, a hallmark of his career. So, there you have it. The early years of Napoleon Bonaparte, a story of ambition against the odds, a family of means but not wealth, and a young man who took every setback and turned it into a stepping stone. From the olive-scented breezes of Corsica to the hallowed halls of French military schools, Napoleon's journey was just beginning. And while his path to power would be anything but straight, his early life set the stage for the drama, the ambition, and the legend that was to follow. Napoleon's journey from Corsican hopeful to artillery officer was just the opening act of a grand opera that would soon crescendo in the chaotic theater of revolutionary France. And what a stage it was. The French Revolution was less a period of calm debate and more a tumultuous, nation-sized game of musical chairs where the guillotine was the only prize. It was into this maelstrom that Napoleon launched his career, propelled by a mix of ambition, talent, and the kind of luck that often accompanies the bold. Enter the Siege of Toulon in 1793, a pivotal moment that proved Napoleon wasn't just another uniform in the crowd. Toulon was a strategic port city on the Mediterranean coast, and when it fell into the hands of royalists and their British allies, the revolutionary government was, to put it mildly, freaking out. Seizing this opportunity, 24-year-old Napoleon saw a chance to make a name for himself, and he seized it with both hands and a cannon. Now, if there's one thing Napoleon understood, it was the power of artillery. While others were still debating infantry formations, he was busy turning cannons into the heavy metal rock stars of warfare. At Toulon, Napoleon organized the artillery in a way that would make any military strategist nod in appreciation, positioning his cannons to dominate the battlefield. It was like setting up a chessboard where he controlled all the queens. His decisive actions led to the capture of a key hill, which in turn led to the fall of the city. The siege was a triumph for the revolutionaries and a personal victory for Napoleon, who was promoted to brigadier general at the tender age of 24. He was the kind of prodigy who made child geniuses look like underachievers. But the siege of Toulon wasn't just a military win. It was a masterclass in branding. Napoleon's name began to circulate among the revolutionary leaders, and in a France that was rapidly rebranding itself, he was the kind of fresh face the Republic needed. You see, revolutionary France was a hotbed of political maneuvering, and Napoleon was like a duck to water in these turbulent times. He understood that power wasn't just about military might. It was about being in the right place at the right time, and crucially, knowing the right people. Speaking of which, let's talk about Napoleon's knack for political networking. In the post-Toulon glow, he made connections with key revolutionaries like Augustin Robespierre, brother of the infamous Maximilian. This was a savvy move, considering that the Robespierres were effectively running the show during the Reign of Terror. Napoleon wasn't just making friends, he was building a network that would support his meteoric ascent. It was like he had a sixth sense for picking the winning side, a talent that would serve him well, until it didn't. But that's a story for another day. Now, it's crucial to remember that this was France during the Revolution, where today's hero could be tomorrow's headless horseman. Napoleon knew he had to stay nimble, both politically and militarily. His rise was as much about dodging metaphorical daggers as it was about wielding real ones. And dodge he did. When the political tides turned, and the Robespierres fell from grace, in 1794, Napoleon managed to keep his head, literally and figuratively, by distancing himself from the losing side. It was a delicate dance, and Napoleon waltzed through it with the finesse of a seasoned diplomat. By 1795, the political landscape in France was as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. The ruling Directory was struggling to maintain control, and Paris was a city simmering with unrest. Enter the royalist insurrection of 13 Vendémiaire, another turning point where Napoleon's strategic genius shone through. He was tasked with defending the government against a royalist mob, and in true Napoleonic style, he opted for a bold, decisive action. He ordered his troops to unleash grapeshot, a brutal form of artillery fire, on the insurgents. The insurrection was quashed, and Napoleon was hailed as the savior of the Republic. It was a classic case of ruthless efficiency, a hallmark of his military career. Napoleon's swift action during the insurrection didn't just quell a rebellion. It catapulted him into the upper echelons of French military and political circles. He was promoted to commander of the Army of the Interior, a role that came with both prestige and power. But more importantly, it got him noticed by Paul Barras, one of the most influential members of the Directory. Barras saw potential in this young general, and in a move that would change the course of European history, he introduced Napoleon to Josephine de Beauharnais, a woman whose social connections were as valuable as her charm. Napoleon and Josephine's relationship was a blend of romantic intrigue and social climbing that wouldn't be out of place in a modern tabloid. Josephine, a widow with 2 children, was a fixture in Parisian society, and her marriage to Napoleon in 1796 was as much a strategic alliance as it was a love match. She opened doors for him in the salons of Paris, providing the social legitimacy that the Corsican outsider desperately needed. Napoleon, in turn, provided Josephine with stability and protection in a city where allegiances shifted with the wind. Their union was a perfect illustration of how personal relationships could be leveraged for political gain. With his personal life providing new avenues of influence, Napoleon was poised to take on his next challenge, the Italian campaign. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, it's essential to recognize that Napoleon's rise was no mere accident. It was a carefully orchestrated ascent fueled by a combination of military brilliance, political savvy, and a dash of good fortune. Whether he was positioning cannons or courting the elite, Napoleon knew how to play the long game. The chaos of revolutionary France was a crucible that tested and forged Napoleon into a formidable force. He wasn't just fighting battles, he was shaping a narrative, one where he was both the hero and the architect of his destiny. This was a man who understood the power of perception, a skill he would use to bend the arc of history to his will. And while his path would eventually lead to an imperial crown, the seeds of his empire were planted in these early years of revolution and ambition. The story of Napoleon was just beginning, and it promised to be as turbulent and grand as the age in which he lived. As Napoleon's story unfolded, he was on the cusp of ascending from a general to something akin to a demigod in the eyes of France. By 1804, the French political landscape was like a game of chess played with live grenades. The Directory had crumbled under its own ineptitude, and the consulate system, with Napoleon as first consul, was teetering on the edge of authoritarianism, a fact as subtle as a cannon blast. Napoleon, never one to shy away from a power vacuum, decided the time was ripe to crown himself Emperor of the French, a move that was equal parts audacious and theatrical. Now, let's talk about this self-coronation business, because it's a tale of propaganda, power plays, and sheer audacity that would make even the boldest politicians today blush. On December 2, 1804, in the grand setting of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon took the crown from Pope Pius VII and placed it on his own head. It was a statement so bold that even the Pope was left holding his hat, quite literally. In a world where divine right was still a thing, Napoleon's act was like flipping the script and rewriting the rules, all while the world watched. Why did he do it? Well, Napoleon was a master of image, a veritable Renaissance man in the art of self-promotion. He understood that emperors weren't just rulers. They were symbols, larger-than-life figures who embodied the spirit of their age. And what better way to solidify his grip on power than by crowning himself, signaling that he owed his authority to no one but himself, and perhaps the French people who had come to adore him. It was a calculated gamble, one that fused political savvy with a dash of theatrical flair. But let's not get swept away by the spectacle. Behind the grandeur of the coronation lay the cold, hard reality of Napoleon's rule. His government was as authoritarian as it was innovative. He was a man who could balance a ledger as deftly as a cannonball, but his reforms often came at a steep cost. Take his economic policies, for instance. The Napoleonic Code, introduced in 1804, was a groundbreaking set of civil laws that laid the foundation for modern legal systems across the world. Yet, it was also a tool for consolidating power, ensuring loyalty through legal means. Economically, Napoleon's ambitions were as vast as his empire. He established the Bank of France in 1800, a move designed to stabilize the economy and fund his military campaigns. And fund them it did. Napoleon's wars were costly affairs, burning through resources like a campfire in a dry forest. To put it in perspective, the French economy during Napoleon's reign was like a high-stakes poker game where the stakes were territory and the chips were lives and francs. Between 1803 and 1815, the Napoleonic Wars cost France about 4.5 billion francs, a sum that would make any finance minister break out in a cold sweat. Yet, it wasn't just about money. Napoleon's rule was also marked by a curtailment of freedoms. He reintroduced censorship, muzzling the press to maintain control over public opinion. Newspapers were reduced to echo chambers of state-approved content, and dissenting voices were silenced with a ruthless efficiency that would make even the most draconian regimes tip their hats in admiration. The secret police, under the ever-watchful Joseph Fouché, ensured that Napoleon's France wasn't just a nation. It was a well-oiled surveillance machine. Despite these heavy-handed tactics, the myth of Napoleon as a benevolent ruler persisted. He was often painted as the hero of the common man, a self-made leader rising through the ranks to lead a nation out of chaos. It was a romantic image, one that glossed over the more tyrannical aspects of his reign. The truth was more complicated. Napoleon's France was a place of paradoxes, where revolutionary ideals coexisted uneasily with authoritarian rule. Napoleon's knack for propaganda was legendary. He understood the power of imagery and narrative, employing artists like Jacques-Louis David to immortalize his exploits on canvas. In these depictions, Napoleon was a modern Hercules, a man of destiny leading France to glory. Of course, the reality was less glamorous. Behind the artistic embellishments lay the grim truth of war, with battles that left fields littered with the detritus of human ambition. Yet, Napoleon's charisma was undeniable. He was a man who could inspire loyalty, a leader whose vision of a united Europe under French hegemony resonated with many. His continental system, an economic blockade aimed at crippling Britain, was as much about strategy as it was about hubris. The idea was to cut off British trade with Europe and force the island nation to its knees. However, the move backfired, causing economic hardship across the continent and stoking resentment among those who chafed under French domination. As Napoleon's empire expanded, so too did the challenges. Ruling over such a vast territory required a delicate balance of diplomacy, military might, and administrative prowess. Napoleon was adept at juggling these demands, but even he couldn't escape the tides of history. His imperial ambitions were like a game of Jenga. Each conquest added another layer of complexity, and one wrong move threatened to topple the entire structure. In the end, Napoleon's story is one of contradictions. He was a revolutionary turned emperor, a man whose name became synonymous with both glory and tyranny. His self-coronation was the apex of his power, a moment that encapsulated his genius for pageantry and his relentless pursuit of authority. Yet, it also set the stage for the challenges that would follow, as his insatiable ambition led him toward both triumph and downfall. As we leave Napoleon standing in Notre Dame, crown upon his head, remember that this is just another chapter in his tumultuous saga. His rise to emperor was not the end, but a prelude to the challenges and conflicts that would define his legacy. In this tale of power and propaganda, Napoleon's story continues to unfold, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, brilliance, and the inexorable march of history. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. Thus, with a crown comfortably perched on his head and the scent of destiny in the air, Napoleon embarked on his grand European escapade. If the world was a chessboard, Napoleon was playing speed chess on a board the size of a continent. His conquests resembled a European tour, albeit one that came with cannons and conscription rather than postcards and souvenirs. But even a man like Napoleon, who seemed to have Lady Luck on speed dial, would find his match in the vast, frigid reaches of Russia, a campaign as infamous as it was catastrophic. First things first, let's dispel the myth of Napoleon's invincibility. Sure, he had a winning streak that would make a Las Vegas high roller jealous, but he was not infallible. The idea that Napoleon could waltz into any country and leave with a trophy case of victories is as fanciful as a fairy tale. Reality check. Military campaigns are logistical nightmares, and Napoleon's Russian campaign was the mother of all logistical nightmares. We're talking about supplying an army of over 600,000 troops, the Grande Armée, across a 500-mile stretch from Paris to Moscow. Imagine trying to move an entire city across the continent without the luxury of modern transport. It was less a march and more a stagger, as carts broke down, horses died, and soldiers deserted. The Grande Armée was like a giant snake, slithering across the plains of Eastern Europe, but unlike a snake, it needed food and lots of it. Keep in mind, Napoleon wasn't exactly waging war in a land of plenty. Russia, with its sparse population and harsh climate, wasn't offering any all-you-can-eat buffets. Napoleon, ever the optimist, expected a quick and decisive campaign. In his mind, he would march into Moscow. The Russian Tsar Alexander I would capitulate, and they would sip celebratory vodka by the samovar. However, the Russians had other plans. They employed a scorched earth policy, burning crops and villages as they retreated. It was essentially a game of catch me if you can, with Napoleon chasing shadows. By the time his troops staggered into Moscow in September 1812, they found a city abandoned and ablaze, offering neither shelter nor solace. This brings us to one of the most enduring myths, that Napoleon was undone solely by Russia's winter. While it's true that the cold was brutal, nature wasn't the only adversary. The real issue was logistics. Napoleon's supply lines were stretched thinner than a Parisian crepe. The army was running on fumes, and the soldiers, once filled with imperial zeal, now faced the grim reality of starvation and disease. Dysentery, typhus, and hunger became their constant companions, proving that even the mightiest armies are at the mercy of microbes and morale. Retreat became the only option, and it was a retreat that would haunt military textbooks for centuries. The Grand Armée's withdrawal from Moscow was less an orderly exit and more a desperate scramble for survival. By the time they staggered back to the relative safety of Poland, only a fraction of the original force remained. Estimates suggest as few as 30,000 men. It's a sobering statistic that underscores the staggering human cost of Napoleon's ambition. If Waterloo was his famous defeat, the Russian campaign was the catastrophe that set the stage. Economically, this campaign was a disaster of epic proportions. The French treasury, once flush from the spoils of war, was now bleeding money. War isn't cheap. Financing an army is like feeding a nation of locusts. Between 1803 and 1815, Napoleon's wars soaked up colossal sums, about 4.5 billion francs, and the Russian debacle only deepened the fiscal quagmire. It was a lesson in overreach, in how ambition unchecked by reality can lead to ruin. Politically, the Russian campaign shattered the illusion of Napoleon's invincibility. His aura as the unstoppable conqueror dimmed, and his enemies, sensing blood in the water, closed ranks. The Sixth Coalition, comprising Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, saw an opportunity to strike. The myth of Napoleon as a military demigod was crumbling, revealing a man who, for all his brilliance, was not immune to the pitfalls of hubris. But let's not overlook Napoleon's charisma, which was as enduring as the myths surrounding him. Even in retreat, he managed to inspire loyalty. He was a leader who could turn defeat into a rallying cry, who could galvanize his troops with promises of glory and revenge. Yet, charisma only goes so far. The Russian campaign had not just stripped Napoleon of his army, it had eroded the foundation of his empire. As the winter of 1812 approached, Napoleon found himself in a precarious position. The emperor who had once seemed poised to rule the world was now grappling with the harsh reality of his own limitations. In the end, the Russian campaign was a stark reminder that even the greatest military minds are bound by the laws of logistics and nature. Napoleon's failure in Russia was a testament to the perils of overreaching ambition, a cautionary tale that echoes through the annals of history. As we leave Napoleon plotting his next move, remember, the tale is far from over. The drama of his life continues to unfold, with twists and turns that will shape the course of European history. Stay tuned, because the saga of Napoleon Bonaparte is like a gripping novel you just can't put down. Napoleon's Russian debacle was a turning point, the beginning of the end for an emperor whose reach had finally exceeded his grasp. Picture a man whose ambition was as vast as his empire, now facing the cold, hard truth of overreach. The Russian campaign had left his army decimated, his treasury depleted, and his aura of invincibility shattered like a carnival mirror after a particularly rowdy night. The myth of Napoleon as the unstoppable force was now as full of holes as Swiss cheese, and the vultures of Europe were circling. Fast forward to 1814, and Napoleon's situation had become precarious. The Sixth Coalition was relentless, with Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia all smelling blood in the water. The coalition forces closed in like a pack of wolves on a wounded stag. Napoleon's empire, once a sprawling testament to his strategic genius, was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Each defeat chipped away at the empire, and the man who had once been the master of Europe, now found himself fighting on all fronts. The campaign of 1814, often called the 6 Days Campaign, was Napoleon's last hurrah on French soil. It was a desperate series of battles that showcased his tactical brilliance even in the face of overwhelming odds. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Napoleon managed to win several engagements, proving that his military mind was as sharp as ever. But like a gambler on a losing streak, his luck had run out. His victories were Pyrrhic, and the coalition's advance was inexorable. By March 1814, Paris was under threat, and Napoleon's marshals, exhausted and demoralized, urged him to negotiate peace. Napoleon, predictably, refused to capitulate. To him, surrender was a foreign concept, but reality has a way of intruding on even the most stubborn dreamers. With Paris occupied by coalition forces in April 1814, Napoleon was left with no choice but to abdicate. It was a fall as dramatic as his rise, a reminder that even the mightiest can be brought low. In a twist of irony befitting a Shakespearean tragedy, the master of Europe was exiled to the island of Elba, a Mediterranean dart where he could rule over a kingdom of goats and fishermen. Elba was intended to be Napoleon's retirement home, but if you thought he'd settle for a quiet life of fishing and reflection, you'd be wrong. The man had more restless energy than a caffeine-fueled squirrel. Within months, he had turned the island into a miniature empire, introducing reforms and organizing a small army. But the island was too small for a man with dreams the size of France. In March 1815, less than a year after his exile, Napoleon pulled off one of history's most audacious comebacks. He escaped Elba, landed in France, and marched to Paris, while Louis Roman XVIII forces defected faster than they could say, "Vive l'Empereur." The 100 Days, as this period is known, was a whirlwind of ambition and drama. Napoleon's return was the stuff of legends, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim his empire. But the romance of the comeback quickly gave way to the harsh realities of geopolitics. The coalition powers, viewing Napoleon as a threat to European peace, swiftly mobilized. The stage was set for the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, a battlefield where fate would deal its final hand. Waterloo wasn't just a battle. It was a showdown between ambition and reality, between a man and the weight of history. Napoleon, ever the tactician, hoped to divide and conquer the coalition forces. But the battle, fought on muddy grounds under ominous skies, turned into a quagmire of misfortune. His forces were met by the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army and the Prussian forces led by Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. It was a day of fierce combat, where fortunes swung like a pendulum. Yet in the end, Napoleon's tactical genius was no match for coalition coordination and sheer numbers. By evening, the French army was in disarray, and Napoleon was a defeated man. Waterloo marked the end of an era. It was the final nail in the coffin of Napoleonic ambition, a sobering reminder that even the most brilliant strategists can be undone by the capricious nature of war. Napoleon was captured and exiled once more, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, a place as isolated as his dreams had been expansive. On St. Helena, Napoleon's world shrunk to the confines of his memories and the rocky landscape around him. There, he became both a prisoner and a myth, a man whose life was a tapestry of triumph and tragedy. He spent his final years dictating memoirs, shaping his legacy with the same precision he had once used to shape empires. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, leaving behind a legacy that would be debated, romanticized, and mythologized for generations. Napoleon's legacy is as complex as the man himself. He was a military genius, a visionary leader, and a relentless conqueror. He reshaped Europe with his wars, leaving behind a continent that would never be the same. His Napoleonic code influenced legal systems worldwide, a testament to his impact beyond the battlefield. Yet, he was also an autocrat who curtailed freedoms and pursued power at any cost. The myth of Napoleon as a tragic hero endures, fueled by the romantic image of a man who dared to dream beyond the ordinary. But his story is also a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. He was a leader who reached for the stars, only to find himself buried under the weight of his own aspirations. In the end, Napoleon Bonaparte remains one of history's most enigmatic figures, a man who was both a product of his time and a shaper of history's course. As we close the book on Napoleon's saga, it's clear that his life was a grand opera of ambition, triumph, and inevitable downfall. He was a complex figure in a complex age, a man whose legacy continues to echo through the corridors of time. And while his empire may have crumbled, the legend of Napoleon endures, an enduring reminder that history is often as much about the myths we create as it is about the realities we face. The Neo-Assyrian Empire's origin story kicks off in a place that might sound like a sneeze, Ashur. Around 2500 BCE, this city was as unassuming as a plain bagel on a breakfast buffet. But from these humble beginnings, Ashur would grow into something more like a spicy jalapeno, making its presence felt far and wide. Situated on the banks of the Tigris River, Ashur was perfectly placed for trade and mischief-making. And oh, did the Assyrians capitalize on that? Now, let's talk about the real estate market of ancient Mesopotamia. Back in the day, you didn't just waltz into power with a well-timed Instagram post or a viral TikTok dance. Nope, the Assyrians were more about the long game. They started small, expanding out from Ashur not with brute force, at least not initially, but with a rather savvy tactic, marriage. Yes, indeed, these folks were the ancient world's version of the matchmaking app, swiping right on alliances by marrying off their daughters to neighboring rulers. It was diplomacy with a dash of romance, and it worked like a charm. But don't let the wedding bells fool you. The Assyrians were no pushovers. Fast forward to the 14th century BCE, and they were flexing their muscles with an expansion policy that was as relentless as a middle schooler on TikTok. By the time we hit the 10th century BCE, they transformed from a quaint city-state into a sprawling empire. Their territory stretched farther than a hipster's definition of local, covering almost all of modern-day Iraq, parts of Iran, Syria, and Turkey. Not bad for a city that started as a speck on the map. Now, you might be thinking of the Assyrians as the leather jacket-wearing bullies of the ancient world, what with their reputation for brutality. But let's set the record straight. They weren't just swinging swords and taking names. These folks had brains as sharp as their blades. Ever heard of the world's first libraries? That was the Assyrians. They were bookworms who collected knowledge like it was the latest iPhone. Ashurbanipal, one of their more intellectual kings, boasted a library in Nineveh that was the Google of its day, with over 30,000 clay tablets covering topics from astronomy to linguistics. And while we're on the subject of innovation, let's talk about their postal system. Yes, the Assyrians had an ancient version of FedEx long before Tom Hanks got stranded on an island. They developed a relay system of couriers that could zip messages across the empire faster than you can say Mesopotamian marathon. This wasn't just about sending love notes or tax reminders. It was a key tool for maintaining control over their vast territories, ensuring that the emperor's word traveled as fast as possible. So, here's the kicker. The Assyrians were far from the mindless barbarians some might imagine. They were a complex society with a knack for warfare, sure, but also for governance, culture, and innovation. Their legacy is a tapestry woven with both the silk of civilization and the iron of conquest. It's a reminder that history, much like a Facebook relationship status, is complicated. In the grand theater of ancient empires, the Assyrians were the rock stars who knew how to put on a show. Their rise wasn't just a series of battles, though, trust me, they had plenty of those. It was a master class in negotiation, innovation, and yes, some good old-fashioned intimidation. From their humble beginnings in Ashur, they crafted a legacy that would echo through the ages, long after the dust of their empire had settled. And that's just the opening act. As we dive deeper into the saga of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, let's take a closer look at the high-flying days under kings like Tiglath-Pileser Roman III and Sargon Roman II. These guys were the ancient world's equivalent of rock stars, except they swapped guitars for chariots and groupies for entire conquered cities. While their names might not roll off the tongue as easily as a modern pop star's, their impact was no less earth-shattering. Tiglath-Pileser Roman III, for example, wasn't just sitting around twiddling his thumbs and enjoying the perks of power. Oh no, he was a man with a plan. Around 745 BCE, he ascended the throne and immediately started to kick down the doors of neighboring states. His military campaigns were legendary, not just for their ferocity, but for their efficiency. While some might think of chariots as the ancient equivalent of a flashy sports car in Tiglath-Pileser's hands, they were more like tanks. These weren't just for show. They were the cutting edge of warfare technology, helping him to conquer vast swaths of territory and bring them under Assyrian control. But let's not forget the real MVPs of his army, the siege engines. These hulking wooden monsters were essentially the ancient version of a wrecking ball, knocking down city walls like a toddler with a Lego set. And while the Assyrians might have been the bullies of the ancient playground, they knew how to spin a good story. Their clay tablets often read like a PR campaign gone wild, with grandiose claims of victory and divine favor. It's like if a modern politician's Twitter feed was etched into stone for all eternity. Moving on to Sargon Roman II, he wasn't about to let the empire lose its momentum. In 722 BCE, he seized control and continued the Assyrian tradition of expansion with a gusto that would make even the most ambitious real estate mogul blush. Sargon wasn't just about military might, though. He was a master at the art of statecraft, organizing his empire with the precision of a Swiss watch. He divided the conquered territories into provinces, each overseen by a governor who was responsible for collecting tribute and maintaining order. In other words, Sargon had a knack for turning chaos into cold, hard cash. Of course, the economic engine behind the empire wasn't just about tribute. Trade played a significant role, with Assyrian merchants casting a wide net across the ancient world. From the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, their trade routes were as complex as a modern stock market. And let's not forget the Assyrians' favorite pastime, plunder. When they weren't busy making deals, they were more than happy to take what they wanted by force. It's the ancient equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover, only with more chariots and a lot less paperwork. While it's easy to romanticize the grandeur of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the reality was far more gritty. Life under Assyrian rule was often harsh, with heavy taxes and mandatory military service. The empire's strength lay in its ability to project power, both through fear and through the constant churn of its economic machine. But here's the kicker. This very reliance on aggressive expansion and control would eventually sow the seeds of its downfall. The empire was like a shark. It had to keep moving to survive. And when it finally stopped, well, that's a story for another day. In the meantime, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the likes of Tiglath-Pileser Roman III and Sargon Roman II. They were the architects of an empire that, for better or worse, shaped the ancient world. Their legacy is a testament to the fact that history is never simple. It's a tapestry of triumph and tragedy, woven together with threads of ambition, power, and yes, a little bit of old-fashioned bravado. As we continue our journey through the annals of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, remember this. The past is never just the sum of its parts. It's a living, breathing story that continues to echo through the ages. As we continue our escapade through the annals of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, let's swivel the spotlight onto the unsung heroes and occasionally villainous elites who kept this colossal machine chugging along. Picture this. An empire as vast as a modern-day corporation, with a pyramid structure that would make any CEO green with envy. Up top you had the king, the head honcho, the big cheese, with a divine mandate that made him part potentate, part rock star. Beneath him was the governing class, a cadre of nobles and officials who were basically the empire's middle management. These guys were tasked with keeping the wheels greased and the machine running smoothly. Now, let's not forget the everyday folks who did the real heavy lifting. The peasants, the farmers, the laborers. These were the backbone of the empire. They toiled in the fields, constructed monumental projects, and served in the army when duty called. And what did they get in return? Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a paid vacation. Instead, they were rewarded with heavy taxes and mandatory military service. It's like being forced to contribute to the world's most aggressive Kickstarter campaign, one you couldn't opt out of. Speaking of monumental projects, the Assyrians were no slouches when it came to infrastructure. Their piece de resistance, the Royal Road. This wasn't just any old dirt path. It was an ancient superhighway stretching over 500 miles, connecting the far-flung corners of the empire. Think of it as the I-95 of the ancient world, minus the rest stops and traffic jams. This marvel of engineering allowed for rapid troop movements, efficient trade, and lightning-fast communication. It was a lifeline for the empire, but also, ironically, a double-edged sword. because while it facilitated control, it also exposed vulnerabilities, making it easier for enemies to march into Assyrian heartlands. Now, let's dive into the juicy bit, the legendary cruelty of the Assyrian kings. Were they really the boogeymen of the ancient world, or is it all just ancient propaganda? The truth lies somewhere in between, a bit like the depiction of your favorite villain on a Netflix series. Assyrian kings like Ashurnasirpal II and Sennacherib didn't exactly have the best bedside manner. They were infamous for their ruthlessness, often depicted in bas-reliefs boasting about their conquests with the same enthusiasm you'd expect from someone showing off their Pokémon card collection. Primary sources from the era, like the annals of the kings themselves, tell tales of sieges and battles with a flair for the dramatic. Sennacherib, for example, once bragged about turning the city of Babylon into a sea of ruins, an ancient mic drop if ever there was one. But before we paint these kings as cartoonish villains, let's consider the socio-political context. In a time where power was as unstable as a Jenga tower during an earthquake, projecting strength was not just about vanity, it was a survival tactic. When you ruled over a diverse empire with a patchwork of cultures, languages, and simmering tensions, a reputation for ferocity was a handy tool to keep the peace, however ironic that might sound. Of course, the Assyrians' PR campaign had its limitations. The terror they inspired was as much a liability as it was an asset. It bred resentment and rebellion among the subjugated peoples, leading to uprisings that chipped away at the empire's foundations. It's the classic tale of the bully who eventually gets a taste of his own medicine. The very fear that kept the empire in line also sowed the seeds of its eventual downfall. Economically, the empire was a complex beast. Tribute from conquered lands was the lifeblood of the Assyrian economy, flowing into the royal coffers like a river of gold. This wasn't just about lining the pockets of the elite. It fueled the empire's military machine and funded the construction of grandiose cities like Nineveh and Nimrod. But here's the kicker. This reliance on tribute was a precarious balancing act. When the flow of wealth was interrupted by rebellion or external threats, the economic pressure cooker was liable to blow. In the grand scheme of things, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a study in contrasts, a place where culture and cruelty, innovation and intimidation coexisted. It's a testament to the complexity of history, a reminder that the past is never black and white, but rather a grayscale portrait of human ambition and folly. So, as we peel back the layers of this ancient powerhouse, let's remember that empires, much like the humans who build them, are inherently flawed. They're driven by the same passions and pitfalls that define our modern world: the thirst for power, the allure of wealth, and the delicate dance between fear and respect. As we leave this chapter open-ended, let's ponder the lessons of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. It's a saga of ambition and audacity, a story that continues to echo through the corridors of time. But hold tight, because the tale is far from over. In the next part, we'll delve into the empire's inevitable decline, exploring how internal strife and external pressures conspired to bring down this ancient Goliath. Until then, remember, the past, much like a good cliffhanger, always leaves you wanting more. And so we find ourselves standing at the precipice of the Neo-Assyrian Empire's grand unraveling, a saga of decline that plays out like a corporate drama where the CEO's chair becomes a revolving door. As the 7th century BCE rolled in, the empire that once spread its wings across the Near East was beginning to show signs of fatigue. It's as if the Assyrians were trying to juggle too many flaming swords, and well, they finally dropped a few. First up, let's talk about internal strife, the kind that would make even the most seasoned HR professional break out in a cold sweat. You see, as the empire expanded, so did the complexity of its bureaucracy. The Assyrian administration became a bit like an overgrown garden, lush but riddled with weeds. Just imagine trying to manage a hierarchy with more layers than a milfoil pastry, where every noble and official had their own agenda. The governors, who were supposed to be the empire's loyal lieutenants, started behaving more like mini-monarchs, ruling their provinces with a degree of autonomy that was both convenient and dangerous. It's like giving your interns the keys to the executive washroom and hoping for the best. At the heart of this bureaucratic behemoth was a series of rulers who, let's just say, made questionable decisions. After the reign of Ashurbanipal, the empire's last great king, The throne became a game of musical chairs played by less competent successors. These kings, with names that might stump even the most ardent of historical enthusiasts, often found themselves embroiled in palace intrigue rather than steering the ship of state. A series of weak rulers is like a string of bad sequels, each one worse than the last, dragging the franchise down with them. While the Assyrians were busy squabbling over who got to wear the crown, external pressures were mounting. Enter the Babylonians and Medes, the empire's very own dynamic duo of doom. These two rising powers were like the scrappy underdogs in a sports movie, relentless and hungry for a shot at the title. The Babylonians, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, were the first to make their move. In 626 BCE, they started a rebellion that quickly gained momentum, turning into a full-blown independence movement. It was the ancient equivalent of a startup disrupting a complacent industry giant, with the Babylonians eyeing the Assyrian territories like prime real estate. The Medes, on the other hand, were the wild card. A confederation of tribes from the Iranian plateau, they were less concerned with diplomacy and more interested in expansion. Under the leadership of Cyaxares, they forged alliances and crafted strategies that would make a chess grandmaster proud. By 615 BCE, they had joined forces with the Babylonians, forming a coalition that would give the Assyrians a run for their money. If this were a high-stakes poker game, the Medes and Babylonians just played a royal flush. As the external threats grew, the Assyrian military, once the pride and terror of the ancient world, began to falter. The empire's overextension meant that its armies were spread thinner than butter on burnt toast. Keeping control over such a vast territory required resources and manpower that the Assyrians could no longer muster. It's the classic case of biting off more than you can chew, and the Assyrians were choking on their own ambitions. This brings us to the economic side of things, where the cracks in the empire's foundation were as glaring as the zero balance in your checking account on a Monday morning. The reliance on tribute from conquered lands was a double-edged sword. Sure, it filled the royal coffers when things were going well, but rebellions and external threats had a nasty habit of cutting off this revenue stream. It's akin to a modern corporation relying too heavily on a single client. When that client pulls out, the whole operation teeters on the brink of bankruptcy. Moreover, the heavy burden of maintaining their military apparatus and funding extravagant building projects had left the empire financially strained. The grandeur of Nineveh, with its sprawling palaces and impressive walls, came at a cost that was increasingly hard to justify. The empire's economy was a house of cards, and the slightest breeze, be it rebellion or a poor harvest, threatened to bring it all crashing down. By 612 BCE, the wheels were well and truly off the Assyrian chariot. The Babylonians and Medes, smelling blood in the water, laid siege to Nineveh. It was a cataclysmic event, the crescendo of decades of tension and turmoil. The city that had once been the glittering jewel of the empire was reduced to ruins, a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the ravages of time and circumstance. The fall of Nineveh wasn't just the end of a city, it marked the end of an era. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, which had once stood as the unchallenged titan of the ancient world, crumbled into the annals of history, its territories divided among the victors. It was a lesson in the dangers of hubris, the perils of overreach, and the inevitable cycle of rise and fall that defines human history. Yet, as we ponder the demise of this ancient powerhouse, let's not forget that the story doesn't end here. The echoes of the Assyrian legacy would reverberate through the ages, influencing cultures and empires that followed. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's leave the curtain drawn on this chapter, with the promise of more revelations to come in the next installment. Stay tuned, because the past, much like a gripping series finale, always keeps us on the edge of our seats, eager for the next twist in the tale. And there you have it, folks, the Neo-Assyrian Empire's grand finale. A blockbuster collapse with all the drama of a Shakespearean tragedy, but with more chariots and less iambic pentameter. Now, let's not get too misty-eyed about Nineveh's fiery curtain call. There's plenty to unpack about what this ancient powerhouse left behind, and it's not just ruins and regrets. First up, let's talk legacy. The Assyrians were like the ancient world's overachievers, the kids in class who not only did their homework, but also designed the school's first library system. That's right, Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh wasn't just a vanity project. It was an intellectual hub with over 30,000 tablets. This was Google before Google, folks, and it provided a treasure trove of knowledge that would echo through history. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and those dusty clay tablets would become some of our greatest resources on ancient languages and cultures. So, next time you complain about a slow internet connection, just remember the Assyrians were downloading knowledge long before fiber optics were a thing. But let's face it, the Assyrians weren't just bookish types. They were also masterful engineers. Their irrigation systems were a marvel of the ancient world, turning the arid plains of Mesopotamia into fertile farmland. They built aqueducts and canals that would make a Roman engineer blush. This wasn't just about growing more barley for beer, though let's be honest, that was probably a perk. It was about sustaining a burgeoning population and feeding an empire. The Assyrians knew that a hungry army isn't good for much except maybe a mutiny, so they kept the grain flowing like ancient Uber Eats. When it comes to military prowess, the Assyrians wrote the book, literally. Their detailed accounts of military campaigns are ancient war manuals filled with strategies that were as effective as they were brutal. Siege tactics, battlefield formations, psychological warfare. These guys were the Sun Tzu of their time, only with more emphasis on making sure their enemies never forgot who was boss. The Assyrian war machine was a force of nature, but as with any machine, it required constant maintenance and resources, and that, dear listeners, was both their strength and their Achilles' heel. Now, about those myths. The Assyrians have been painted as the boogeymen of the ancient world, ruthless conquerors who would make even the toughest warlords quiver. But let's bust that myth wide open. They were also shrewd administrators and diplomats. Their empire was a patchwork quilt of diverse cultures, and keeping it stitched together required more than just intimidation. They had to be good at governance, balancing the carrot and the stick with the finesse of a tightrope walker. Sure, they leaned heavily on the stick when needed, but they also knew when to toss out a carrot or two to keep the peace. And speaking of balance, let's not overlook the economic juggling act that was the Assyrian economy. Yes, tribute and plunder filled their coffers, but trade was the hidden engine humming beneath it all. The Assyrians were traders par excellence, with networks that stretched from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. They moved goods, ideas, and even people across their empire with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. It was this interconnectedness that allowed them to maintain such a vast dominion for so long. But like any system stretched to its limits, all it took was one weak link, like a rebellion in a key province, to send the whole thing toppling down like a house of cards. In a delicious twist of irony, the Assyrian penchant for aggressive expansionism sowed the seeds of their own destruction. Their reputation as fierce conquerors made them enemies as well as admirers. The coalitions that formed against them, particularly the Babylonians and Medes, were a testament to the fact that when you make a career out of making enemies, they might eventually decide to have a conference call without you. The lesson here: maybe take a breather in your quest for world domination. Sometimes less is more. But let's not forget the cultural impact. The Assyrians left behind a rich tapestry that influenced the civilizations that followed. Their art, with its intricate bas-reliefs and detailed carvings, captured the imagination of future empires. Their mythology, too, seeped into the cultural consciousness of the region, blending with the stories and traditions of neighboring peoples. Even their legal reforms, which included some of the earliest known codifications of law, set a precedent that would echo through history. So, what do we take away from all this? The rise and fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire is a masterclass in the complexities of power, how it's won, wielded, and ultimately lost. It's a story of ambition and innovation, but also of hubris and overreach. In the end, the Assyrians were victims of their own success, a cautionary tale about the perils of stretching too far too fast. In the grand tapestry of history, the Assyrians are a reminder that empires, like fashions, come and go. They rise from the humblest of beginnings, reach dizzying heights, and eventually they fall. But even in their fall, they leave behind threads that weave into the fabric of future civilizations. So, as we wrap up this saga, let's raise a metaphorical glass to the Assyrians, the dreamers, the builders, the conquerors, and yes, sometimes the villains of their age. They remind us that history, much like life, is a mix of triumph and tragedy, innovation and folly, legacy and lesson. And if there's one thing we can learn from them, it's that the echoes of the past always have a way of finding us, no matter how many centuries have slipped by. As the dust settles on the ruins of Nineveh, remember that the story of humanity is an endless cycle of rise, fall, and rebirth. The Neo-Assyrian Empire may have crumbled, but its spirit lives on in the pages of history, a tale of audacity and ambition that will continue to captivate and caution generations to come. So, next time you find yourself pondering the fate of empires, just remember, history might not repeat itself exactly, but it certainly loves a good rhyme.